bonds of shame, addiction, and trauma. For trauma survivors, it's easy to confuse the sensations of mental and bodily activation with genuine connection. When the subconscious recognizes stress responses as our homeostatic home, we may misinterpret signals of threat and tension as sexual attraction and chemistry. We eventually acquire an emotional addiction to this heightened mood, which keeps us trapped in cycles in which we wind up in the same relationship dynamics, with the same or different partners. This traumatic bonding is an addiction, much like any other, that takes us on a similar biochemical roller coaster. Many of us are tempted to choose adult relationships that match our conditioned cycle of intimacy and rejection, which began in infancy as part of our earliest interactions. This can manifest as a parent figure who was inconsistent in expressing love, paying attention 1 minute and complete lack of interest the next. Because we want affection, our young brains learn to adapt. If our parent figures offered us attention when we misbehaved, even negative attention, we may have acted out on purpose in order to get more attention. This may not appear to be meeting our needs, despite the fact that we are receiving attention and being noticed, both of which are basic requirements in childhood. Our attempts as children to have our physical, emotional, and spiritual needs fulfilled by our parent figures, however inadequate and personal, or even self-betraying they may have been, build the foundation of how we meet those same needs in our adult relationships. Regardless matter the outcome, we tend to gravitate toward familiar patterns. It's no surprise, then, that youngsters raised in stressful and chaotic circumstances will seek out similar environments as adults. When we are afraid of physical harm, sexual assault, or desertion, our bodies change on molecular, neurochemical, and physiological levels. If we are conditioned to equate the release of stress hormones and our nervous system response with the emotion of love, the sensation we get can become addictive. This results in homeostases, all the way down to the firing and wiring of our neuronal circuits in our brain. We are continually seeking to repeat our past subconsciously because we are animals of comfort who love to be able to foretell the future, even if that future is bound to be sad, miserable, or even terrible. It's preferable than the unknown. Sexual chemistry has strong physiological impacts as well. When a romantic relationship is built on intense highs and lows, there are typically parallel sexual highs and lows that make us feel extremely alive. The hormones released during sex are powerful. Oxytocin promotes the feeling of bonding and functions as a pain reliever, temporarily numbing any emotional and physical discomfort. Dopamine improves our mood, and estrogens offer women an overall boost. It's no surprise that we crave more of that rush, especially when it's linked to the conditioned dynamics of our infancy. When the waves are this powerful, it can be quite difficult to keep your head above water. This is why, in the early stages of our romantic relationships, troubles frequently arise following the sex-infused honeymoon period. After that, we frequently complain of boredom or begin to generate our own tension by hyper-focusing on what we perceive to be our partner's flaws. We feel dull and numb when we are conditioned to equate love with a trauma response. I've been through this cycle. If there was no approaching crisis in my relationships, I'd be irritated and restless, and I'd make it a point to cause some stress. I became addicted to my past and made it my future. Then I'd feel bad for making the same mistakes over and over. The emotion of guilt stems from the realization that we should know better. Yet our illogical and all-powerful subconscious prevents us from pursuing the better, more sensible option. I've worked with numerous individuals who have become trapped in the attraction shame cycle that is inherent in traumatize. We are frequently aware that we have this history and that we are engaging in these patterns. this is usually not lost on us. Red flags are almost always visible, even when they aren't. Many of us have friends and family members who see them, and gently, or not so kindly, try to warn us about them. When we engage in trauma bonding, we are not reacting from our rational thinking. We are being drawn in by our subconscious wounds of the past, living in autopilot habits that are rooted in the familiar. As long as you are oblivious of these conditioned patterns, even if you discover the ideal, whatever that means, for you partner with no red flags, you will feel as though the relationship is lacking something vital. There will be no connection since you are still locked in the trauma bond condition, which no amount of good reason can break. All of this is shared to assist you understand that trauma relationships are not anything to be embarrassed of. A cascade of physiological responses is racing through your body, striving to maintain you exactly where you are. Just leave or you should know better counsel is not helpful and does not stem from a place of understanding the dynamics of trauma. Trauma bonding is a learned process that must be reversed. It takes time and dedication, as well as hard effort. Trauma bond archetypes, as with every other opportunity for growth in this book, witnessing trauma bond patterns is the first step in breaking them. We're going to go over the childhood traumas I mentioned in Chapter 3 again, this time looking at how they affect our adult relationships. Remember that this is not a neat checklist. Many people identify with multiple of these archetypes, while others do not recognize themselves in any of them. Our trauma reactions may not neatly match up with this list. Nothing in life does. The idea here is to allow oneself permission to travel back in time and ask yourself questions like, what happened way back when? How did it harm me? And how do I now cope in my relationships? Being raised by a parent who denies your reality. A void is produced in the self whenever a child is taught that what they are thinking, feeling, or experiencing is invalid. Those of us who have this wound frequently continue to deny our own reality in order to maintain peace. Such a person is either oblivious to their own needs or is pathologically laid back. These people have the potential to be martyrs, acting selflessly to their own cost. They often avoid disagreement and live under the credo, if you're all right, I'm okay. Those who have had truth-denying traumas may get confused about their own reality as a result of being detached from and skeptical of their intuition for so long. They continue to delegate their decisions and requirements to those around them. As their needs continue and animosity increases, those of us who have these scars end up blaming everyone around us for our decisions. Having a father who is blind, and deafeningly those who thought their parents overlooked or neglected their basic need to be seen and heard. They learn early on that in order to accept affection, they must quiet their inner nature. We witness a similar reaction in those who grew up in a home with emotionally immature members, i.e., using icing or the silent treatment as punishment. In such an environment, love is frequently either sparse or unconditional, and people almost fully erase their wants and needs to ensure they receive whatever they can. There is also a lot of behavioral modeling going on. Those who have been iced frequently freeze others when they are threatened. This trauma can also be seen in the selection of big personality companions. A client I worked with was frequently drawn to powerful, high-achieving partners who would physically suck all the air out of any room they entered. Such people have a core wound. I am not seen or heard, and so they choose a partner who keeps them in this state of living out the expression of the core hurt, drawing them back to the familiar state of smallness or invisibility. Playing this role, on the other hand, elicits all of the unsettling emotions connected with not being seen or heard. Every time this woman chose a big personality, the relationship ended when she began resenting her partner for the precise reasons she had felt connected in the first place. Having a parent who either lives vicariously through you or molds and develops you. When our parent figures communicate preferences about our beliefs, wants, and needs directly or indirectly, it creates a lack of room for our real self-expression. This can show in a multitude of ways, and it frequently results in a reliance on external guidance from partners, friends, and even mentor types for input or comment on all of life's large and minor issues. These are the people who must always speak things out, sometimes with numerous people, in order to find out how they feel. They have no connection to intuitive advice since they have always been told what they should feel, think, or be. This frequently leads to their ongoing search for a guru or leader, or to their drinking the Kool-Aid of new ideas, or groups having a parent who does not set boundaries for their children. We intuitively knew boundaries as youngsters, despite the fact that many of us were raised in households where our parent figures did not have clear limits themselves. Some of our parental figures subconsciously broke our boundaries by telling us to do things we didn't want to do only to be nice or good. Those encounters overrode our intuition and innate constraints, leading us to mistrust our inner messages. In adulthood, we may find ourselves continually allowing our limits to be crossed and disregarding our own demands in relationships. This denial of need can develop into rage or resentment over time, a concept called as contempt, which has been shown in lengthy research by famous couples therapist Dr. John Gottman to be a known relationship killer. As a common reaction to boundary violations, we feel resentment and ask, why do people take advantage of me? Or why don't people appreciate me? What we don't realize is that this behavior is a result of our lifetime failure to set boundaries or limits on the amount of time, energy, and emotional resources we invest on others. Having a parent who is excessively concerned with looks. Many of us received both direct and indirect messages about our looks from parent figures who were concerned with how we looked physically, our weight, hairstyle, clothing, or even how the family unit was seen by others in the community. As adults, we may develop the tendency of comparing ourselves to others to determine if we measure up on superficial levels, failing to recognize that emotional wellness extends far beyond surface looks. This reliance on outward appearance causes us to become unduly focused on the picture of ourselves that we project to the world. We may even deny or conceal painful or challenging matters in order to retain the impression of being perfect. Social media, which allows us to publish lovely photographs and captions, can compound this, despite the fact that many of us are suffering deeply behind the mask. Having a parent that is unable to control their emotions. We feel emotionally overwhelmed when we watch our parent figures coping with their emotions by erupting or withdrawing. We lack adaptive emotional coping skills and general emotional resilience by maturity. Many of us exhibit the same emotional reactivity or repression that our parents did. Some of us may experience emotional outbursts as we yell at people or rush around the home banging doors. Others may cope with intense emotions by distancing. This person may appear to be avoidant or conflict averse. These are the people who engage in dissociation on the extreme end of the spectrum. Some people utilize external help to achieve this state, such as numbing themselves with drugs and alcohol, diverting themselves with social media, or sedating themselves with food. The tie itself may act as a numbing agent, and when we are engaged with a relationship, we don't have to wonder if something deeper is causing us to be sad. Keep these fundamental archetypes in mind while you pay attention to how your body feels in the presence of the individuals in your life. Our relationships serve as a navigation system that allows us to assess the level of our mental health. Take a moment to jot down the names of some of the people with whom you have the most intimate relationships. Underneath the names, put down how you feel the majority of the time when you interact with them. Do you have a tense, apprehensive feeling, or do you feel liberated and secure? This will start to make you conscious of some of the relational patterns you picked up from your childhood experiences. The trauma bond apparatus. Most of the time, each person in a relationship is struggling with the after effects of their own childhood traumas, while also attempting to live, love, and prosper together. Nobody ever said that being in a relationship was easy. One of my clients, a practicing therapist, approached me for assistance with her seesawing relationship with her husband. There are components of their attachment that are highly unique, as with any trauma bond, and others that are more generalizable. Joshua and Shira's relationship exemplifies how the personal can frequently be universal. Joshua and Shira are involved in the Orthodox Jewish community. Family, ritual, and tradition are all important to them. Aside from these shared principles, the two could not have been cut from a more disparate cloth. Shira's parent figures both had special needs and were mostly unable of caring for her, delegating the task to members of the extended family, specifically grandmothers and aunts. Shira was well aware that her parent figures had specific requirements, and on a fundamental level, she yearned for a closeness that they were unable to provide. That emotional neglect left her feeling unloved all the time. To cope, she became a people pleaser, constantly seeking external reinforcement that she was worthy of love. Joshua, on the other hand, comes from a family of 8 brothers and sisters. His mother struggled to control her emotions and was quite narcissistic. Her needs came before those of her children, and as the oldest son, Joshua felt obligated to maintain his mother stable in order to survive. Over time, he discovered that the easiest way to accomplish this was to keep silent and suffocate his own emotional world. As you may have anticipated, this led in dissociation. Joshua was driven to find his love in the outside world through achievement and success by his familial environment, as well as cultural teachings that males should not be emotional. He studied medicine, was accepted to one of the country's top medical schools, and eventually became a surgeon. When Shira came to see me, Joshua was suffering from physical difficulties that left him feeling frail and frustrated, making his work as a physician quite difficult at times. All of the issues that had been present in the relationship since its inception were compounded by the physical anguish. He was cold and distant during times of stress and conflict, which exacerbated Shira's abandonment wounds and made her feel desperate, afraid, and dependent. When Joshua returned home from a long day, exhausted, he would withdraw and shut down. Shira would act out when she sensed a lack of connection. What's the matter? Are you upset with me? The search for love would begin. It would then escalate into accusations. You don't love me. You're having a relationship. Shira would physically pursue Joshua, calling him 50 times in a row, showing up to his practice, confronting family members about his behavior, panic-stricken and utterly alone. The only way she felt genuinely protected was to close the imagined gap between them. In order to reclaim his safety, Joshua suppressed his feelings even more, viewing Shira's attempts at closeness as threatening, similar to how he felt when his mother's emotions dominated his own. Shira and Joshua's relationship is a textbook example of approach. Withdrawal patterning. When he withholds his affection, she feels abandoned and understandably emotionally upset, and she begins to pull closer to him in order to reclaim her own felt emotional safety. The closer she gets, the more he draws away, and the more anxious she becomes. Neither partner's wants are addressed, and each becomes irritated with the other. The trauma bond dynamic is summed up in this way. When requirements are unfulfilled on a regular basis, resentment sets in. Resentment destroys relationships. Genuine love. Just because you're involved in traumatize doesn't indicate your relationship is doomed. Far from it. Trauma connections are teachers, showing the relational patterns we've always had and the areas where we might start to work on changing them. Fortunately, These patterns are not predetermined. The process of transformation, like everything else we've studied thus far, can begin once you are conscious of them. I wouldn't say Joshua and Shira's trauma links have been totally healed, but they have both committed to do the work on themselves and their relationship, understanding the role that their childhoods have played in it. Shira has learned to compassionately cope with her understandable emotional reactivity by engaging in breathwork and meditation to try to detach herself from her innate wants to react when the push-pull trauma bond trap develops. Meanwhile, Joshua has learned to articulate himself when he begins to emotionally detach, telling his wife things like, "I'm feeling myself draw away," or "I'm feeling overwhelmed by this circumstance." To an observer, it may not seem like much, but for Shira, simply hearing her spouse describe his inner world experience helped her feel more emotionally linked, deactivating her nervous system from the understandable threat of abandonment. When she hears him express himself, she feels the connection she craves, allowing her to feel safe enough to practice giving him the emotional space he requires. Lolly and I began off in a trauma bond as well. We met after my divorce, when I had finally determined that I was ready to date casually again. Her self-assurance drew me in right away. She appeared to be quite self-assured, and that energy was very appealing. Even the most self-assured individuals have wounds. Lolly, like Joshua, has a history of trauma as a result of growing up in a high emotional setting. To cope, she adopted avoidant attachment, which associates a great deal of dread with love bonds. Basically, "I'm afraid you'll leave me. I'm afraid you'll stay." She'd be involved and enthusiastic one day, then bolt when a problem emerged the next. That, of course, aroused the hell out of me emotionally, and it also kept me tethered to her, because the roller coaster of our early relationship so closely reflected the stress and chaos of my childhood. When things were terrible, I would feel all of those emotions rush through me and ride the wave of dread until things improved, at which point I would wait for the other shoe to drop. Before either of us knew it, we were conspiring in numerous ways to ensure that things went wrong. It was a stress train to which we were both addicted. We were both unaware of our own dynamics. Ollie had always wished to be a change agent. She didn't want her relationships to become stagnant, and she believed that they needed to evolve in order to survive. She desired to grow and expand rather to be content with the status quo. I had been looking for ways to improve myself, learning from my newly discovered awareness of my past relationship patterns. Meeting Lolly came at a point in my life when I was spending more time with my family. Now that I was back in my hometown of Philadelphia, many of the patterns of the past were coming to the surface, whether I wanted to admit it or not, because of the frequency with which I was seeing them. Lolly gradually began to share her observations as she spent more time with all of us. She noticed that I would become apprehensive and reclusive in the days leading up to meeting my family, and then following, I would remain in a heightened emotional state, ready to fight and on edge for days. That would irritate her as well, as I vented my emotional energy upon her. At first, I didn't see it. In fact, at first, I was openly antagonistic to these insights. With increased consciousness and access to self-truth, I gradually became aware of all those now obvious conditioned responses. She assisted me in seeing the light, rather than driving me away or punishing me. She became a catalyst for positive transformation. As we dug deeper into the task, our thirst for development grew even stronger. We both agreed to show up every day and collaborate on the task. We went to bed earlier than usual. We exercised. We went through our morning routines. We kept a journal. We altered our diets and detoxed our chemically laden bodies. All of that awareness and change was initially emotional. It was so overwhelming that we would occasionally cry on the floor. It was overpowering all at once. Our shared experience made the healing journey that much more transformative, even on days when I truly didn't want to. I opted to go because she was there. I began to exhibit because I wanted to for myself over time. A relationship cannot be utilized to repair the holes or wounds left by a parent figure in order for it to grow. A healthy partnership allows for reciprocal growth when two people offer each other the freedom and support to be fully seen, heard, and self-expressed. This is the core of true love. Authentic love is not an emotional roller coaster. It is tranquility and an inner awareness that you are both choosing to show up from a position of mutual respect and adoration. Genuine love is secure. It is based on the realization that the other person is not property to be owned, and that your spouse is not your parent figure, someone who can mend or heal you. This is not a rom-com portrayal of love. Genuine love may not always feel nice or particularly romantic, because the emotional addiction cycles that we normally connect with romance are not activated. There is no charge of excitement born of fear of abandonment or withdrawal of love and support. It is a stable state. You don't have to put on a show or hide aspects of yourself to gain affection. You will still be bored or uneasy. You will still be attracted to other individuals and may even lament the loss of your single life. Conscious relationships aren't made out of fairy tales. There is no such thing as you complete me. There's no poof, living happily ever after. Authentic love, like everything else you've encountered thus far, demands effort. The next step is to recognize the role of self-betrayal in your trauma ties, as well as the role you may play in fulfilling your own needs. Complete the work. Recognize your trauma bonds. Take some time pondering and writing using the following prompts for those that applicable to create an awareness of how your childhood scars or suppressed feelings continue to affect you in your relationships in adulthood. Remember to return to the journaling activity you completed in Chapter 3, noting the childhood scars you endured. A parent figure who denies your reality. Consider and write about how you react when someone denies your thoughts, feelings, or experiences. Spend some time observing yourself and investigating what kinds of experiences elicit these feelings. Taking note of your reactions. Use the following diary prompt. Today, when I felt and reacted by a parent figure who doesn't see or hear you. Consider the experiences that continue to leave you feeling unrecognized. Take note of how you try to be seen or heard as an adult. Do you, for example, find yourself desperately attempting to make others notice or hear you? Or do you have a deep underlying sense of being unacknowledged? Do you find yourself acting out parts in your relationships in order to be validated? Do you keep some ideas, feelings, or aspects of yourself hidden because you believe others will not approve? How do you deal with feeling unappreciated as an adult? Use the following journal prompt. Today, when I feel and behave as follows. A parent figure who lives through your molds and shapes you. Consider the times, relationships, or activities in which you feel yourself going through the motions without a genuine passion or particular purpose. Do you experience feelings of humiliation, bewilderment, or a lack of fulfillment? These are frequently manifestations of living outside of our real nature and purpose. Spend some time observing the various ways you continue to base your decisions on external considerations, such as others' voiced wants, earned accolades, or imagined anxieties, e.g., they'll stop liking me if I change. Consider how you continue to accept, rely on, and alter in response to messages from others about who you are or aren't. Take note of the numerous ways you continue to express only the aspects of yourself that you find acceptable while repressing the parts of yourself that you find unsuitable based on these signals. Don't worry if you're not sure who you are yet. Many of us aren't, since we've been told who we are from a young age. Use the following diary prompts. Today, I continue to base my everyday decisions on external circumstances and live for others in the following ways. Today, I continue to receive the following messages, which influence my current actions. A parent figure who does not represent boundaries. Spend some time observing, rather than evaluating or critiquing, yourself in relationships with others, friends, family, romantic partners. The journal prompts below will help you become more conscious of your boundaries in those relationships. You may not have any boundaries at all. I know I didn't at one point. We can make fresh choices about our own boundaries and how we respond to the boundaries of others as we grow more aware. Remember that this is a discipline. It will take time to become comfortable and confident in speaking your limitations. Do you have the freedom to say no? Or do you feel guilty or afraid of doing so? Do you feel comfortable to express your boundaries and your actual feelings in certain situations? Do you automatically try to persuade others to accept your thoughts or opinions? A parent figure who is overly concerned with appearance. Spend some time observing, not judging or criticizing, your relationship with your physical appearance. Your relationship with yourself and others reflects how you feel about yourself physically. Because the majority of your narratives regarding your physical appearance are unconscious, becoming aware of them will help you understand your present narratives and build new ones. Remember to be gentle and sympathetic with yourself as you work through these suggestions. You are not passing judgment here. Your goal is to remain objective and inquisitive. How should I talk to myself about my body? How do I approach my friends about my body? How often do I physically compare myself to other people? How should I address other people's physical appearance? Having a parent figure who is unable to control their emotions. Spend some time observing how you govern your own emotions now that you are an adult. Take note of how you perceive yourself feeling and managing with your emotions. Spend some time noticing the various ways you continue to reject specific feelings in your everyday life or in many areas of your life. Do you always try to be upbeat and the light of the party? Do you find it difficult to express your emotions to friends and partners? Do you keep some feelings hidden while expressing others fully? Use the following journal prompts to reflect. How do you react when you have a strong emotional experience? Do you have a coping method for dealing with emotional stress? What exactly is it? How do you communicate with those around you while you are having a strong emotional experience? Do you exercise self-care after a traumatic emotional experience? Or do you find yourself blaming yourself for your reactions? I continue to reject my emotions in the following ways today. 10. Restrictions. My customer Susan was up in a normal middle-class family where the mantra was family is everything, which was similar to my own. Susan idolized her family early in her healing path, overcompensating by exclusively talking about her parents' unconditional love and support. I don't know why I'm like this. She would say of her own issues with feeling lost and unfulfilled. I had everything I could ever want. Her parents were married for a long time. They attended every school function. They both lavished her with love. A beginner's guide to boundaries. Boundaries encapsulate what we've learned so far. I hesitate to single out one subject as most significant, but I sincerely hope that if anything sticks with you after reading this book, it will be this chapter. Boundaries keep you safe. They maintain your physical equilibrium. They assist you in connecting with your intuitive self and are essential for experiencing authentic love. Boundaries are a necessary foundation for all relationships, especially the one you have with yourself. They are the retaining walls that keep you safe from what feels inappropriate, unacceptable, inauthentic, or simply undesirable. We feel safer expressing our authentic wants and needs when we have boundaries in place. We are better able to regulate our autonomic nervous system response, living more fully in that social engagement zone, because we have established limits that cultivate safety, and we rid ourselves of the resentment that comes with denying our essential needs. Boundaries are necessary, but they're also terrifying, especially if we come from a tangled family dynamic in which boundaries were non-existent or continuously violated. The majority of us have never learned to say no. As a result, we say yes to too many things and meet too many expectations until we reach a breaking point and put our foot down. We frequently experience guilt and shame as a result of our abrupt 180-degree turn. As a result, we apologize, dismiss our own needs, or over-explain. If you recognize yourself in any of these behaviors, there is a good chance that you could benefit from some new boundaries in your life. The first impediment to boundary work is the concept of niceness, a character attribute that needs to be reconsidered. Dr. Aziz Gazipura, a self-confidence expert, argued in his book Not Nice, stop people-pleasing, staying silent, and feeling guilty, and start speaking up, saying no, asking boldly, and unapologetically being yourself. That niceness is based on the following incorrect formula. If I please others, then others will like me, love me, shower me with approval, and everything else I want. He referred to this phenomena as the niceness cage, in which the need to be valued traps us in a trap we create for ourselves. Being not nice, i.e., being loyal to your actual self, allows us to claim our own worth. It's not about being mean, arrogant, or thoughtless. It's about understanding what you want, knowing your limits, and conveying that to others. Learning to say no, and not always be so compliant, is a vital aspect of reclaiming oneself. Learning to say no is frequently the most self-kind thing you can do for yourself and people you care about. Though many of us struggle with porous or non-existent boundaries, a significant number of us go the other way and build overly rigid limits. We don't allow for any connectivity, instead walling ourselves off with emotional withdrawal modes to keep ourselves distinct from others. For those who do make it past the wall, we enforce severe norms of conduct and behavior. If a key attachment figure consistently breached a boundary in childhood, we may continue to feel uncomfortable in most other relationships. For some, the wall we construct serves as a type of safety after living through an interwoven childhood experience. When we withdraw for self-preservation, we make free and spontaneous relationships with other humans difficult, making us and others more regulated and, we believe, safer. As a result, we suppress our intuitive voice and end up in the same lonely, inauthentic place as those who have no boundaries at all. Spend some time observing various elements of your life, and then use this self-diagnostic technique to help you understand where your limits lie within the three categories of strict, loose, and flexible. Rigid has only a few intimate, close relationships, has a persistent dread of rejection, overall, has trouble asking for assistance, is loose, a fiercely private individual. People-pleasing is a compulsive behavior. The judgments of others define one's self-worth, has an inability to say no in general, is a habitual fixer, helper, saver, rescuer who consistently overshares sensitive information. Flexible is aware of and cherishes his or her own thoughts, opinions, and beliefs, understands how to communicate one's requirements to others. Personal information is appropriately shared, is able to say no when necessary, and accepts others doing the same, is capable of controlling emotions and allowing others to express themselves. When it comes to boundaries of any kind, it's critical to remember that the border is for you, not for others. It is not an ultimatum to force someone to behave in a certain way. An ultimatum is a statement that assigns a consequence to someone else's behavior in order to try to modify it. A boundary, on the other hand, is a personal restriction that is specified so that your demand is satisfied immediately. It is something we do for ourselves, regardless of how the other person feels. A secondary benefit is that the other person may change in some way. Allowing people to have their own limits and boundaries, as well as respecting and honoring theirs while maintaining your own, is a crucial component of defining boundaries. When our needs are not met or are actively violated, we cannot throw a finger at another person and say, "You need to change." A better question to ask is, what should I do to ensure that my needs are better met? Boundaries of many types, because boundaries pertain to such a broad range of human experience. Body, mind, and soul, different boundaries are required to reflect that range. The first is a physical limit. Loose physical boundaries can lead to an obsession with image, seeing your worth and how you appear, what your body can accomplish, and how others see you sexually. On the other end of the spectrum, you can almost become bodiless, a floating consciousness separated from your physical demands and with no connection to your body. If our physical boundaries are very strict, we may feel overwhelmed by our bodies and seek to limit or confine our experiences, denying our wants and sexual impulses as acts of repression. Outlining your personal space and stating your preferred amount of physical touch can be examples of honoring your body's wishes and requirements. Setting limits around what you will and will not discuss. For example, your comfort with verbal commentary on your body or sexuality might be part of it. It may also entail being conscious of and carrying out your own self-care needs, such as the number of hours you need to sleep, what you eat, and how you move your body. A resource boundary is the second sort of border. When we are overly generous with our resources, we are constantly on call, just as Susan was with her pals. Those with insufficient resource limitations are continually giving and kind to the point of exhaustion, resulting in unequal, tiring exchanges with friends, lovers, and family members. When we give and give, we usually do so because we believe that the more selfless we are, the more love we will receive, and that our time should be freely given away. This is not a true reflection of reality. Time is one of our most valuable resources. However, most of the people I've met who struggle with resource boundaries are unable to say no when asked to dedicate time or energy to things they don't particularly care about. There is also the inverse of this. Those who have overly strict boundaries around their resources, adhering to a predetermined routine every day. Getting to the gym at a certain hour is a frequent one regardless of the external situation or their internal state, is an example of having a hard resource boundary around time. Even in the face of a family disaster, persons with inflexible resource boundaries will continue to engage in their planned activity regardless of the conditions surrounding them. I used to be really rigorous about planning. I would even meticulously organize my TV viewing. Finally, a lack of flexibility in how we squander our resources can be restrictive and does not satisfy the diverse demands of the real self. And there's the mental, emotional border, which is frequently breached in families dealing with enmeshment concerns. When we have loose mental, emotional boundaries, we often feel responsible for the mental, emotional situations of those around us, and we have an internalized urge to rescue others or keep everyone happy, because it is difficult to always make another human happy. This lack of boundaries is frequently destructive to our own resources and tiresome. Meeting the needs of others is an impossible ideal that eventually leads to a neglect of our own needs. We also develop porous mental, emotional boundaries in an intertwined household, which leads to a tendency to indulge in groupthink. This occurs when there is a group conceptualization of our thoughts and views, which is especially prevalent in religious households where it is known that everyone will adhere to the same practices and beliefs. The message heard by all family members, both direct and indirect, is one of conformity, followed by a fear of being outcast for noncompliance. Those of us with very rigid mental, emotional boundaries frequently have no interest in anyone else's perspective. When we are obstinate and determined about our own beliefs or emotions, we remain disconnected from the people around us, making meaningful connection impossible. There is no room for a meeting of minds or souls when our guard is always up. We are transformed into an island. Such severe rigidity is unusual, to say the least, but it can be seen in minor ways, such as when we insist on getting exactly half of something even though we don't want it at all. Mental, emotional boundaries allow us to separate ourselves and our emotional world while enabling others to have their own emotional world. We can more quickly access our intuitive voice and better regulate our emotional states when we have boundaries in place. We feel more at ease discussing our thoughts, opinions, and beliefs with others when we are in this state of emotional safety. We are not always bound to please or agree with others. Emotional overshare and dumping. Emotional oversharing is a common topic in my self-healers community. Many of us were never permitted to keep things to ourselves, especially if we had overbearing and enmeshed parent figures who modeled oversharing, expected full disclosure, or shared an excessive quantity of information when it was unsuitable for our developmental stage. I hear so many stories about best friends and the mother-daughter dynamic that begins with the sharing of incorrect information at an early age. Olivia, a self-healer who struggles with an oversharing urge, claims that this interaction with her mother began when she was 6 years old and her mother informed her about having sent a friend to remove her father from a strip club. It was far too much knowledge, far too quickly. Olivia's mother's lack of boundaries influenced her usage of boundaries with others, and she recognized she frequently overshared in times of stress or discomfort. She characterized herself as an air filler who would just talk, and talk if she felt the other person was uncomfortable. It was an instinctual reaction, and she occasionally said things she subsequently regretted. It is advantageous for us to erect barriers around our own world. We therefore allow for quiet intervals in conversations rather than filling the silence with our own stream of mind. There are some things we can choose to keep private. We have a choice about when and to whom we direct our emotional energy when we have suitable boundaries in place. Choice is critical. It is the realization that your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs are your own, and that you can choose whether or not to share them with everyone. Another common result of lack of mental, emotional, and resource boundaries is emotional dumping, which is the spilling of emotional troubles onto another person without empathy for their emotional state. I'm sure you can think of at least one person in your life that does this. Maybe you are one of them. Some people refer to it as venting. However, this is incorrect. Venting has a positive connotation. It focuses on a single topic, relieves tension, and is frequently aimed toward a beneficial end. Emotional dumping, on the other hand, entails the airing of negative, cyclical, and obsessive thoughts. People who are prone to emotional dumping are frequently locked in an emotional addiction cycle. Their heightened emotional state perpetuates the behavior even when it is not supported by those around them. Sharing with others and reaching out for aid and guidance is a natural human instinct that is often emotionally beneficial. Emotional dumping is a persistent and compulsive coping method that leaves no room for anyone else's needs, let alone direction. Emotional dumping is a coping mechanism born of both sides' lack of mental, emotional limits. The emotional dumper has loose mental, emotional boundaries, and the people on the receiving end, if they find themselves in this position on a regular basis, also lack adequate boundaries to terminate it. People will sometimes emotionally dump in an attempt to escape an emotion that they do not believe they can handle on their own. Unloading unpleasant emotional energy on another person, on the other hand, can be damaging. When someone continuously dumps dread and gloom even when learning good news about another person, emotional dumping might feel like a punishment. For example, when you tell a friend about a job advancement or a recent vacation They immediately redirect the subject to their problems at home, or even your problems with your spouse. Though it may appear hostile and even weaponized, it is not always intended. Emotional dumpers frequently feel at ease, or in a state of familiar homeostasis, only when discussing issues that allow them to feel miserable. When confronted with an unknown positive, they return to the more distressing baseline when their entire system feels at ease. Emotional dumping does not have to be one-sided. As the primary form of connection, a relationship might be constructed around emotional dumping. When a relationship revolves around a primary shared conflict, this is an example of mutual emotional dumping. Even if their marriages ended years ago, two people may bond through their nasty divorces and reveal detail after detail of the horrible things about their husbands. The two are caught in an emotionally addictive cycle of autonomic activation. Boundaries of many types, because boundaries pertain to such a broad range of human experience. Body, mind, and soul, different boundaries are required to reflect that range. The first is a physical limit. Loose physical boundaries can lead to an obsession with image, seeing your worth and how you appear, what your body can accomplish, and how others see you sexually. On the other end of the spectrum, you can almost become bodiless, a floating consciousness separated from your physical demands and with no connection to your body. If our physical boundaries are very strict, we may feel overwhelmed by our bodies and seek to limit or confine our experiences, denying our wants and sexual impulses as acts of repression. Outlining your personal space and stating your preferred amount of physical touch can be examples of honoring your body's wishes and requirements. Setting limits around what you will and will not discuss. For example, your comfort with verbal commentary on your body or sexuality might be part of it. It may also entail being conscious of and carrying out your own self-care needs, such as the number of hours you need to sleep, what you eat, and how you move your body. A resource boundary is the second sort of border. When we are overly generous with our resources, we are constantly on call, just as Susan was with her pals. Those with insufficient resource limitations are continually giving and kind to the point of exhaustion, resulting in unequal, tiring exchanges with friends, lovers, and family members. When we give and give, we usually do so because we believe that the more selfless we are, the more love we will receive, and that our time should be freely given away. This is not a true reflection of reality. Time is one of our most valuable resources. However, most of the people I've met who struggle with resource boundaries are unable to say no when asked to dedicate time or energy to things they don't particularly care about. There is also the inverse of this. Those who have overly strict boundaries around their resources, adhering to a predetermined routine every day. Getting to the gym at a certain hour is a frequent one regardless of the external situation or their internal state, is an example of having a hard resource boundary around time. Even in the face of a family disaster, persons with inflexible resource boundaries will continue to engage in their planned activity regardless of the conditions surrounding them. I used to be really rigorous about planning. I would even meticulously organize my TV viewing. Finally, a lack of flexibility in how we squander our resources can be restrictive and does not satisfy the diverse demands of the real self. Then there's the mental, emotional border, which is frequently breached in families dealing with enmeshment concerns. When we have loose mental, emotional boundaries, we often feel responsible for the mental, emotional situations of those around us, and we have an internalized urge to rescue others or keep everyone happy, because it is difficult to always make another human happy. This lack of boundaries is frequently destructive to our own resources and tiresome. Meeting the needs of others is an impossible ideal that eventually leads to a neglect of our own needs. We also develop porous mental, emotional boundaries in an intertwined household, which leads to a tendency to indulge in groupthink. This occurs when there is a group conceptualization of our thoughts and views, which is especially prevalent in religious households where it is known that everyone will adhere to the same practices and beliefs. The message heard by all family members, both direct and indirect, is one of conformity, followed by a fear of being outcast for noncompliance. Those of us with very rigid mental, emotional boundaries frequently have no interest in anyone else's perspective. When we are obstinate and determined about our own beliefs or emotions, we remain disconnected from the people around us, making meaningful connection impossible. There is no room for a meeting of minds or souls when our guard is always up. We are transformed into an island. Such severe rigidity is unusual, to say the least, but it can be seen in minor ways, such as when we insist on getting exactly half of something even though we don't want it at all. Mental, emotional boundaries allow us to separate ourselves and our emotional world while enabling others to have their own emotional world. We can more quickly access our intuitive voice and better regulate our emotional states when we have boundaries in place. We feel more at ease discussing our thoughts, opinions, and beliefs with others when we are in this state of emotional safety. We are not always bound to please or agree with others. Emotional overshare and dumping. Emotional oversharing is a common topic in my self-healers community. Many of us were never permitted to keep things to ourselves, especially if we had overbearing and enmeshed parent figures who modeled oversharing, expected full disclosure, or shared an excessive quantity of information when it was unsuitable for our developmental stage. I hear so many stories about best friends and the mother-daughter dynamic that begins with the sharing of incorrect information at an early age. Olivia, a self-healer who struggles with an oversharing urge, claims that this interaction with her mother began when she was 6 years old and her mother informed her about having sent a friend to remove her father from a strip club. It was far too much knowledge, far too quickly. Olivia's mother's lack of boundaries influenced her usage of boundaries with others, and she recognized she frequently overshared in times of stress or discomfort. She characterized herself as an air filler who would just talk, and talk if she felt the other person was uncomfortable. It was an instinctual reaction, and she occasionally said things she subsequently regretted. It is advantageous for us to erect barriers around our own world. We therefore allow for quiet intervals in conversations rather than filling the silence with our own stream of mind. There are some things we can choose to keep private. We have a choice about when and to whom we direct our emotional energy when we have suitable boundaries in place. Choice is critical. It is the realization that your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs are your own, and that you can choose whether or not to share them with everyone. Another common result of lack of mental, emotional, and resource boundaries is emotional dumping, which is the spilling of emotional troubles onto another person without empathy for their emotional state. I'm sure you can think of at least one person in your life that does this. Maybe you are one of them. Some people refer to it as venting. However, this is incorrect. Venting has a positive connotation. It focuses on a single topic, relieves tension, and is frequently aimed toward a beneficial end. Emotional dumping, on the other hand, entails the airing of negative, cyclical, and obsessive thoughts. People who are prone to emotional dumping are frequently locked in an emotional addiction cycle. Their heightened emotional state perpetuates the behavior even when it is not supported by those around them. Sharing with others and reaching out for aid and guidance is a natural human instinct that is often emotionally beneficial. Emotional dumping is a persistent and compulsive coping method that leaves no room for anyone else's needs, let alone direction. Emotional dumping is a coping mechanism born of both sides' lack of mental. Emotional limits. The emotional dumper has loose mental, emotional boundaries, and the people on the receiving end, if they find themselves in this position on a regular basis, also lack adequate boundaries to terminate it. People will sometimes emotionally dump in an attempt to escape an emotion that they do not believe they can handle on their own. Unloading unpleasant emotional energy on another person, on the other hand, can be damaging when someone continuously dumps dread and gloom even when learning good news about another person. Emotional dumping might feel like a punishment. For example, when you tell a friend about a job advancement or a recent vacation, they immediately redirect the subject to their problems at home or even your problems with your spouse. Though it may appear hostile and even weaponized, it is not always intended. Emotional dumpers frequently feel at ease or in a state of familiar homeostasis only when discussing issues that allow them to feel miserable. When confronted with an unknown positive, they return to the more distressing baseline when their entire system feels at ease. Emotional dumping does not have to be one-sided. As the primary form of connection, a relationship might be constructed around emotional dumping. When a relationship revolves around a primary shared conflict, this is an example of mutual emotional dumping. Even if their marriages ended years ago, two people may bond through their nasty divorces and reveal detail after detail of the horrible things about their husbands. The two are caught in an emotionally addictive cycle of autonomic activation. How to determine boundaries. The first step in establishing boundaries is to define them, to assess your life and identify areas where limits are lacking. It can be difficult to decide where to put limits if you don't have them. This is very normal. Examine the people and events in your life. How do you feel about eating brunch with a college friend? Do you feel a tightening in your chest? Is there a feeling of resentment preceding it? What about throughout the meeting? Do you feel expansive, spacious, and nourished, or exhausted, restricted, and limited? What about afterwards? Do you want to see her again soon? Or are you already planning ways to avoid her next call? Boundaries keep us connected to our intuitive voice. That tightness in your chest is a dead giveaway. It is critical to use boundaries based on how you feel. Remember that when we observe how we feel, we are not in the thinking mind. Instead, we are seeing how something or someone registers in our body. When you begin to notice your physiological feelings, examine where your current boundaries are lacking. What has to change or shift in order for you to feel safe and secure in your relationships? This assessment is for you. There will be a pull to imagine the effect on the other person if you come from enmeshment patterns. How will Janet feel if I cancel our plans? The goal is to recover your own energy and ask yourself what will make you feel happier, safer, and more at ease. Spend a few days going over your connections and identifying and listing your most frequently breached boundaries. This will provide you with a roadmap on where to begin defining your boundaries. Here are a few examples of crossed borders by type. Physical. Your mother makes jokes about other women's weight. Change is required. You want her to cease. Mental. Emotional. A friend frequently emotionally dumps about her ex-boyfriend. Change is required. You desire a more reciprocal partnership. Resource. Every lunch break, a coworker insists on sharing his meal with you. Changes are required. You'd like some alone time. Now that you've identified the places where boundaries might be beneficial and what you hope to achieve with them, it's time to figure out how to begin practicing setting them. Obviously, how you approach depend on what you aim to achieve. And the first stage is communicating your boundary. When you speak clearly, you set yourself and your relationship up for success. Setting a goal for yourself allows you the space and chance to define your why. I'm doing this because of X or Y. For example, because I want the relationship to survive, or because I value our friendship. While this does not need to be communicated to the other person, it is beneficial for you to be completely aware of it. If you want to describe your why to the other person, it may sound like I really care about you, and I will have to make some adjustments in the way we communicate. When stating your limit, it is best to utilize objective language as much as possible. You want to concentrate on facts. If a phone call comes in the middle of the night, when I'm sleeping, it will go unanswered. It's preferable to avoid using you language as much as possible because it can stimulate the defensiveness of the other person's ego. Even if it's difficult, try to remain confident and respectful. Remind yourself that you're not doing anything wrong. You value yourself and your relationship. To get you started, I've attached an example of a boundary setting template that you may modify to suit your needs. I'm making some changes so that insert your objective for your new boundary and hope you appreciate how important this is to me. I'm guessing insert your interpretation of their conduct. When you insert problematic conduct, I frequently feel insert your sentiments, which I recognize you may be unaware of. Insert something you would or would not wish to happen again in the future. If enter initial problematic behavior occurs again, I will insert how you will respond differently in order to meet your own needs. Keep in mind that timing is everything. It is preferable to communicate a boundary when both parties are as emotionally stable as possible. When we're activated, we're not in a position to receive anything difficult. Remember, when our vagus nerve is activated, even our middle ear muscles lock down. To the best of your abilities, attempt to pick a moment when both parties can share your new boundary that is as emotionally neutral as possible. Instead of becoming preoccupied with how the other person may feel, it is helpful to focus on how you will continue to respond differently in the future as you consider setting new limits. Many boundaries are destroyed before they are even articulated. We begin to imagine how our boundaries will harm others or how they would retaliate and harm us. We scolded ourselves. We persuade ourselves we're ungrateful or selfish, which I refer to as the feel-bads, without first rebalancing our dysregulated neurological system, addressing our inner child's wounds, and understanding our trauma bond patterns. These feel-bads can easily hinder us from taking deliberate action that would ultimately help preserve and deepen our ties. Sometimes having an active dialogue about the boundary is unrealistic, and you can express your new limit without having a proactive conversation. This is especially important in less intimate relationships, such as having lunch with a coworker. Here are some ideas for establishing a boundary with a single sentence. I wish I could, but this isn't the time. I'm not at ease with that. I'm not going to be able to accomplish this. Wow, thanks for the offer. Invitation, but I'm afraid that's not something I can do right now. I'll have to follow up with you on it. Setting limits began professionally for me. It felt safer to say no to a stranger via email than to my boyfriend or family members. I began to set time limits for how much emotional energy I would waste on certain hobbies, such as scrolling through social media or with specific people. I recommend that you start modest, especially if you are new to creating boundaries. Practice on the outskirts or in less difficult emotional situations, such as lunch with a coworker. These are excellent places to start practicing creating boundaries, because more casual relationships don't have as much history or baggage. They're wonderful locations to develop your boundary-making skills and get used to saying no. The more practice you put in, the better you'll become. Over time, you'll realize that setting boundaries has two outcomes. The other person will be offended, or they won't. Consider all of the worst-case situations. Is it true that they're that bad? They aren't always that way in practice. Believe me, the agony we feel while creating boundaries will spare us years of bitterness and rage. The relationship that emerges once a boundary is established may not seem the same as it did before, but it will be stronger more honest, and ultimately more sustainable. Boundaries are necessary for all healthy partnerships. Consider them an act of service. The third step may appear simple, but it is sometimes the most difficult. Maintain your new limit. Once you've established a boundary, it's critical to stay present and calm, resisting the impulse to defend or over-explain yourself. Regardless of how the other person reacts, you may experience stress as a result of someone else's reaction, or the reaction of a larger unit, your family, work, etc. It's critical that once you've established a boundary, you stick to it. When we begin to change how we present ourselves in relationships, it is useful to understand that the longer the connection has been in existence, the more expectations have been enacted and cemented over time. Accepting that the other person's expectations of you will be disrupted, sometimes abruptly, might be beneficial from their perspective. Furthermore, the recipient of a new boundary, particularly one with abandonment wounds, will most likely respond defensively or even offensively. Much of this upkeep entails quieting an inner voice, those feel-bads that sneaks up on us and tells us that we have no right to set boundaries, and being selfish, rude, or cruel. As you establish and maintain your boundary, you may encounter confusion, pushback, snide remarks you've changed, for example, or even wrath. Simultaneously, you'll likely experience dread, doubt, and a want to return to the familiar, that pesky homeostatic impulse at work. Don't look back once you've decided to start honoring and protecting yourself and feeling a little safer. If you truly need and want change, there is no going back to old habits. When you set a boundary and then remove it when someone flips out, you are only reinforcing that person's propensity to push you over the edge with their behavior. It's typical negative reinforcement. They'll repeat that behavior whenever they confront pushback in your relationship. Everything will return to normal if I scream and yell loudly enough. Expectation and commitment. The mother who expects you to listen to her gossip. The coworker who expects you to have lunch with them every day. The friend who expects you to pick up the phone when she needs to emotionally dump. All of these people will be disappointed, upset, or angry if their expectations and perceived needs are not met. That's okay. Instead of expectation, you've provided them with a choice. They can continue to engage in that activity and confront a boundary, typically the elimination of your presence or support, or they can respect your boundary and continue their relationship with you in a new way. Setting boundaries empowers them because you give them a choice as well. Remember that expectations work both ways. Internal boundary work frequently entails negotiating our own expectations and understanding what particular people are and aren't capable of. It is critical to recognize that many people will not change, at least not immediately, and that others may never change. It can be useful to develop your expectations around another person's response to a boundary based on previous experiences. If you have a mother who has a history of being unabashedly intrusive, you may opt to engage in some amount of compromise. Mom is likely to continue doing what she does. In this scenario, determining your ultimate limits and using them as no compromise zones for yourself can be beneficial. You may also find it beneficial to alter your internal expectation that others will change more completely and become more adaptable in response to their limitations, abilities, and level of consciousness. If we are unable to be flexible, we may have to withdraw totally from the engagement or relationship, which entails establishing the most extreme type of boundary, terminating contact. As we begin to use self-healing techniques and develop a better knowledge of our own recurring patterns, we also begin to perceive others from a different perspective. When we do so, we frequently discover that compassion grows for other individuals in our relationships, including those with whom we have chosen to discontinue ties. I'll return to the earlier example of the mother who frequently makes disparaging remarks about other women's weight. Zoe, a fellow self-healer, whose mother does this, believed for a long time that it was meant to cut her down since she has struggled with her weight. When I questioned her, "What is it about bigger women that makes your moms so reactive?" she took a step back. A light bulb appeared behind Zoe's eyes. A woman for whom my father left her as a heavier person. A few moments passed. My mother has a core abandonment trauma that was triggered by my father's infidelity. But the hurt is the abandonment she endured as a youngster when her father died unexpectedly. Suddenly, those jokes weren't about cutting her daughter down. They were the utterances of a terribly wounded child struggling with the loss of a parent figure. Even though Zoe continued to refuse to participate in her mother's comments, she set a new boundary and ended any and all conversations when her mother began to discuss weight. She now felt sympathy for her mother and love for the inner child inside her who felt so unlovable, so worthless, that she needed to disparage others to feel better about herself. Healing occurs when we see the limitations of others, when we see sorrow and fear where we formerly saw cruelty. The final line. Boundary work found its way into my life in an organic way. It's not as if I thought, now that I've worked on my body and mind, it's time to do people work. Instead, when I began to analyze my past and current identities, my need for self-protection became clear. I began the process on the outskirts, observing my inner sensations in the presence of my friends and colleagues. I never get excited when this individual texts me, or I feel drained after having lunch with that individual. I began to spend less and less time in several of those relationships. I became aware of the impact my lack of boundaries had on others. With one friend, I constantly emotionally dumped her and simply ripped her ear off about the current drama or difficulty in my life. That unsettling realization slapped me in the face. I didn't know nearly as much about her as she did about me. It didn't feel good to see myself as I truly was, but it was crucial in maintaining our friendship. We're still friends now, thanks to my efforts to change our interpersonal dynamic. My boundaries trip eventually lead me to my entwined family unit. It took some time for me to be ready to ask the inquiry. Can I build a healthy connection structure with my family? It all started with food. Meals are the primary source of bonding, an expression of love in a large Italian family. There's guilt if you don't take a second helping, and disapproving eyes if you decline a certain meal when you're watching what you put into your body. As Lolly and I began to radically alter our diets, I decided to set a new limit for myself about food and my family. I would not eat anything I didn't want to eat. If there was backlash, I would stand firm. I wouldn't want anyone else to modify their routines or prepare special meals for me, and I would respect my new personal preference. And I started exploring time restriction boundaries with similar tactics from my job life. On holidays, I set a timer for myself. I'll spend 2 hours with my family on Christmas Eve and won't attend Christmas Day supper. When my parents called to invite me, I made a conscious effort to wait a minute or two before calling them back. Are you okay? The texts and phone calls inevitably came in. Are you okay? I'm fine. I'd say I just need some room. The frantic calls and texts would resume a few days later. In reaction, I established a rule that I would not phone or text back unless I was actively seeking to do so. That was the beginning of freeing myself from my family's enmeshment by validating my own reality. I could have my own wants, needs, and desires, and they didn't have to match theirs. I then had to negotiate a boundary with my sister, which was more difficult because I am closest to her. Our border encompassed our interactions, which all centered around my mother, her medication management, doctor appointments, and mental health. I chose to begin by limiting my availability for doctor's appointments, and I set a limit on the phone. No more hour-long conversations about Mom. None of those steps were easy. Delivering that new and unexpected message of no shook my inner child, whose habits and conditioning around enmeshment are so intertwined with my basic identity. The voices in my head gave me all the reasons why I should let that boarder go. You're a lousy daughter, sister, aunt. I knew I was striving to save our relationship, and that things would continue as they were if I didn't intervene. My family didn't see any reason to modify things at the time. I was told I was self-centered. You can't do this to me, exclaimed my sister. My mother chastised me. My father chastised me. When I confided in my sister about how emotionally detached I'd always felt from our mother, she shared my feelings with the rest of the family, shattering the cord of trust and connection between us. I stopped confiding in her about anything. It became increasingly challenging to remain committed to both my own healing and my family at the same time. I began to ask myself, what is the cost to my own healing in managing these relationships? Eventually, I came to the conclusion that the expense was prohibitively expensive. I was exhausted, unsatisfied, and bitter. I determined to set the ultimate boundary: full separation. It was a decision for my inner child, demonstrating to her that, yes, I could take time and space apart from her and make decisions that were beneficial for her, even at the cost of others. For the first time in my life, I honestly showed up for myself, while also learning how to show up authentically for others. That barrier, the result of months of agonizing deliberation, drastically reoriented my life. This would force me to find my community, a new family of sorts, and would also put me on the path to discovering my calling, my true spiritual path in life. Hit to work. Create a new boundary. Step 1. Establish the border. Consider the following list of the various sorts of boundaries that are available to you in all of your relationships. Spend some time observing yourself in these various types of relationships. Many of us, for example, have friends, family members, colleagues, and/or romantic partners with whom we engage on a regular basis. Exploring your connection patterns with them can give you a solid understanding of the most constant limits, or lack thereof, in each of these relationship types. Physical confines, the quantity of personal space, physical touch, and so on that is most comfortable for you, as well as the timing of physical contact that is most convenient for you. Your overall level of comfort with verbal comments about your beauty, sexuality, and so on. Your overall comfort level with sharing your personal space, apartment, bedroom, office, etc. with others, including friends, partners, coworkers, and so on. Disclosing personal digital passwords, and so on. Boundaries of the mind. Emotions, your overall ease in sharing your personal thoughts, opinions, and beliefs with others without changing them to match those of others, or insisting that others adapt to match yours. Your ability to pick which personal thoughts, opinions, and beliefs to communicate with others without feeling compelled to overshare, or attempting to persuade them to overshare. Limitations on resources, your capacity to exercise choice about where and how you spend your time, avoiding any predisposition toward people-pleasing, and allowing others to do the same. Your ability to avoid taking personal responsibility for the emotions of others, avoiding the desire to assume the role of fixer or to blame others for your emotions. Your ability to restrict the amount of time either individual spends venting grievances. Take some time to think about what your most frequently crossed boundaries are in each of these areas. Are you unsure? That's fine. Many of us have never heard of limits, so it's difficult to know if we're even setting them. If this describes you, you should spend some time exploring your personal boundaries, or lack thereof, in all aspects of your life. You may have a tendency to create and maintain comparable boundaries across the majority of your interactions, while completely ignoring some boundary types. Alternatively, you may see variances among different sorts of relationships. You may be able to create boundaries around your time at work and with friends, but not with romantic partners. And you may find yourself unable to consistently say no to a certain family members or love partners' requests for time or favors. It will be beneficial to start identifying the changes you want to see in this area. To assist you, consider using the following prompts. When my physical self feels uneasy, unsafe, to make room for my physical self to feel more at ease. Safe. Examples. When my coworker, uncle, friend, etc. frequently makes jokes about my appearance, I feel uncomfortable, unsafe. I no longer want to be around people that make those types of jokes in order to create space for my physical self to feel more comfortable. Safe. When my mental, emotional self feels uneasy, unsafe, to make room for my mental, emotional self to feel more at ease. Safe. Examples. My mental, emotional self feels uneasy, unsafe when a family member, friend, boyfriend, etc. repeatedly criticizes my new health choices. I no longer want to hear about, debate about, or defend my personal health choices in order to make room for my mental, emotional self to feel more comfortable. Safe. When my resources seem uneasy, unsafe, to make room for my resources to feel more at ease. Safe. Examples. When a friend contacts me at odd hours to emotionally dump about her relationship problems. My resources seem uncomfortable, unsafe, to make room for my resources to feel more comfortable. Safe. I am no longer taking calls at specific hours, and I will consciously choose when I engage in emotional dumping. Step 2. Establish a barrier. It takes practice to communicate a new limit. The more explicitly you communicate your new limit, the more likely it is that change will be successful. You can start practicing using the following words to express your new limit to others. I'm making some changes so that. Insert your intention for your new boundary. 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 And I'm guessing. Insert your interpretation of their actions. I frequently feel. Insert your sentiments when you. Insert the harmful conduct. And I recognize you may not be aware of this. In the future, insert what you'd like to happen or what you don't want to happen. I will. Type how you will respond differently to meet your own need if. Insert initial problematic behavior occurs again. Examples. I'm making some changes so that we can keep our relationship going since I care about you and hope you appreciate how important this is to me. I think my new dietary choices will make you uneasy. When you constantly comment on what I am or am not eating, I find it difficult to eat in your presence, and I recognize that this is something you may not be aware of. I'd like to avoid talking about food or dietary choices entirely in the future. If you make a comment about my eating choices again, I'll excuse myself from our conversation or the activity we're doing. I'm making some changes so that we can keep our relationship going since I care about you and hope you appreciate how important this is to me. I imagine you're dissatisfied with your current relationship and want to be heard. When you call me to vent on a regular basis, I frequently feel emotionally depleted, and I recognize you may not be aware of this. I may not always be around when you feel the need to rant. In the future, if you keep phoning me for each relationship issue you're having, I won't always be able to help you at that moment. Fill in the blanks with details relevant to your desired new border if you want to use this prompt. It's possible that you'll find this new language strange at first. That is completely normal. Remember that most of us are apprehensive about new experiences due to our subconscious thinking. You'll become more comfortable with this new communication style with practice. This practice may include alone rehearsing of these scripts, which will help you acquire confidence before sharing them with others. I'm making some adjustments so that. And I hope you appreciate how important this is to me. I'm guessing I frequently feel, and I recognize you may not be aware of this. In the future, if happens again. Tips, it's all about the timing. The greatest time to communicate is when neither party is emotionally reactive. It's not a good idea to try to communicate a new boundary when you're in the thick of a fight. Find a time that is not emotionally charged. Remember the deep belly breaths you learned in Chapter 5. These can assist soothe any nervous system reaction you're having and return your body to a state of calm. Instead of focusing on the other person's reaction or change, try to focus on how you will begin to respond differently in the future while speaking. Communicate with as much confidence, assertiveness, and respect as possible because it's new and scary for most of us. This may be difficult at first, but practice will make it easier. It is vital to plan ahead and practice. Begin by establishing new limits in relationships where the stakes are low. This will assist you in gaining experience for more challenging interactions. Be willing to make concessions if necessary. Remember that you want to respect others' boundaries, so you might find yourself willing to change your initial request. You should be aware of what is and is not negotiable for you. For example, you may be willing to use your resources to support someone emotionally, but not to compromise on your physical limits. And that is perfectly fine. Step 3. Keep the line drawn. It's critical that you stick to your new boundaries once you've communicated it. This means you shouldn't revert to your former habits. This is the most difficult element for many of us because we don't believe we have the authority to establish limits. We might think it's selfish, nasty, or cruel to do so, or we might feel horrible about the other person's reaction. Your explanation of your new boundary may open core attachment wounds for a lot of people who have core attachment wounds around abandonment. And many of us do. They may be hurt and may lash out in retaliation. You've changed. You may suffer emotional reactivity, perplexity, pushback, or sarcastic comments from others. Are you now more holy than now? Alternatively, you may develop a case of the feel-bads, shame, guilt, and selfishness, leading to a strong desire to revert to previous habits. Remember that this is all part of the process of change. Creating boundaries is some of the most difficult work you'll do on your healing path. It's also likely one of the most crucial steps toward reclaiming a connection to your own desires and needs while honoring and respecting those you care about. Making room for each of us to be seen, heard, and truly expressed is at the heart of the job. 11. Reparenting. Awakenings aren't always instantaneous, contrary to popular belief. Those stunning flashes of insight are the stuff of legends and Hollywood. They rarely happen in real life. Though an aha moment might strike us like a bolt of lightning, most awakenings are the result of a series of revelations over time. Dr. Steve Taylor, a psychologist, researches a phenomenon he calls awakenings. You can call them flashes of insight, realizations, or anything you choose. After his own spiritual awakening piqued his interest, he discovered that these encounters share 3 characteristics. They frequently arise from a state of inner turmoil. They frequently occur in a natural setting. And they frequently connect us to some kind of spiritual in the broadest sense of the term practice. Awakenings show us that we are more than just flesh and blood, that we have a soul or spirit, and that we yearn for a connection to something bigger than ourselves. Awakenings teach us that we are not always who we think we are. On our road to becoming conscious, we often gain these insights through suffering, living through confusion and sorrow. And awakening is a rebirth of the self that entails tearing down pieces of who you were when you were living in a condition of unconsciousness and autopilot, even if we've prepared our bodies properly. The shock of opening our eyes to a completely new universe is excruciating. It's excruciatingly difficult to be cognizant in an unconscious world. It's telling that during And after spiritual awakenings, brain scans reveal the same neuronal circuits that are engaged in depression, which psychologists refer to as two sides of the same coin. People who participate in consistent spiritual activities activate and even enlarge the size of their prefrontal cortex, the site of the conscious mind, while those who suffer from depression and negative thoughts decrease activity in the same area. My epiphany took place in stages. It happened during a period of great physical and mental stress, when my body, mind, and spirit were all out of whack. It was a personal crisis. Life became unpleasant, with old and new challenges mounting around me, and I had no choice but to handle those that had grown out of hand to the point where they had become my normal. If I had sought outside help at this time, I would almost certainly have been diagnosed with depression or anxiety, as I had been previously. Instead, I was drawn inward by intuition to self-witnessing, which revealed how disengaged I had been. For the first time in my life, I began to see these signs as messengers rather than as things to suppress or ignore. I recall complaining to a friend in my late 20s, years before I launched on the self-healing journey, about feeling pushed in two directions about where I would spend my holidays, by my wife at the time, and by my family. "Well, what do you want?" my friend inquired innocently as he stared at me. I was on the verge of falling out of my chair. I didn't know what I wanted. Years later, after cutting links with my family, withdrawing myself from people and places that no longer served me energetically, and generally being less open to others, feelings of separation began to torment me again. Albeit this time, they did not stem from my previous practice of dissociating. I felt as if I had abandoned most of the people I had known in the past, and I assumed that some of them would now despise me. I was depressed, 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 depressed. I was thinking to myself, will I ever be able to locate my family? I wasn't aware of it at the time, but I was going through a spiritual transition. A spiritual shift has occurred. Those were the remarks of a data-driven psychologist who regarded herself as at the very least an agnostic. Science was my god. Spirituality was something I avoided because it wasn't something I was aware of at the time. I had to understand my own emotional, physical, and spiritual needs before I could completely connect with people, and for the first time in my life, I had to focus on addressing them. It's a painful process. You're removing old skin and becoming more aware of yourself than you've ever been. You must see yourself in order to love yourself. And you must love yourself in order to give yourself what you couldn't obtain from others. A beginner's guide to repair. The fulfillment of children's intrinsic needs is necessary for their healthy growth. We rely on our parent figures and the family unit as a whole to give us with physical, emotional, and spiritual nutrition when we are in a condition of reliance. We long to be seen, heard, and truly expressed, just to be ourselves. We learn that it is safe to voice our needs and seek help from others when we see our parent figures participate in supportive activities. Most parents never learned how to address their own needs, let alone those of their children, and they pass on their own unresolved traumas and conditioned coping techniques to their children. Even well-intentioned parents don't always provide us with what we need. It's nearly difficult to meet everyone's various and distinct needs all of the time. However, if we grew up with an emotionally immature parent figure, our demands were likely ignored or ignored on a regular basis. Emotional immaturity is caused by a lack of emotional resilience, which is defined as the ability to process emotions, communicate limits, and restore equilibrium to our nervous system. An emotionally immature parent figure may have temper tantrums, acting selfishly or defensively, and the entire family unit may become centered around their moods. Understanding your parent figure's level of emotional maturity, or lack thereof, As psychotherapist Lindsay Gibson wrote in one of my favorite books on the subject, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents: How to Heal from Distant, Rejecting, or Self-Involved Parents frees us from emotional loneliness as we realize that their negativity wasn't about us, but about them. I've seen the effects of living with emotionally immature parent figures time and time again. Parent figures who can't identify their own needs, who betray themselves in order to earn love and acceptance, who live in resentment because they believe others should just know what they need. Their adult children frequently operate from the safe and familiar space of their ego with all of its stories and have a strong desire to be right, rejecting other people's perspectives and making others feel as small and insignificant as they once did. Others construct avatars of themselves, always wearing a mask, for fear of scaring people away if they reveal their genuine identity. Some people eschew all forms of intimacy, while others cling to it fervently. The manifestations vary, but the way we heal these wounds is to offer ourselves what we didn't have as kids. The only way forward is to recognize that we may become the wise parent to ourselves that we lacked as children. This is known as reparenting, and it allows you to relearn how to address your inner child's unmet needs by taking daily, devoted, and intentional action. For decades, psychodynamic concepts comparable to reparenting have existed. They have arisen from the mainstream treatment idea that a solid relationship with a therapist can serve as a foundation for stronger interpersonal relationships. The concept of transference, or the transfer of feelings from our upbringing onto a therapist, is a fundamental aspect of the therapeutic process in psychoanalysis, though having such assistance can be really beneficial if we have the means, access, and privilege to do so. Of course, no one knows your wants and needs and how to meet them better than you. No one else can, and will have to, turn up every day to meet those ever-changing requirements. These are efforts that must be made by you, and in harnessing your own strength, you will develop a deeper, more true connection with yourself. It's up to us to learn the skills we'll need to meet our own needs. When we reparent, we first learn to recognize our bodily, emotional, and spiritual needs, and then we practice observing the conditioned ways we've attempted to meet those needs. Many of us may discover that as adults, we frequently embody the critical inner parent, denying our reality, rejecting our needs, and prioritizing the perceived needs of others over our own. Our intuitive voice is replaced by guilt and shame. Everyone's reparenting process looks different. We wish to silence our inner critic and embrace self-respect and kindness in general. You can learn to confirm your reality and feelings by watching them rather than instinctively judging or disregarding them with the guidance of your knowledgeable inner parent. Your wise inner parent cultivates acceptance while supporting your inner child's desire to be seen, heard, and cherished for who you truly are. You are given precedence. You must learn to trust yourself in order to build your smart inner parent. Maybe for the first time in your life, setting little pledges to yourself to engage in regular acts of self-care and following through on those goals might help you regain lost trust. Starting a new habit of speaking kindly to yourself, as if you were dealing with a child in pain, will be beneficial. Every day, you may start by asking yourself, what can I do for myself right now? The more you do it, it will become an automatic reaction to the world around you, reconnecting you to your intuition. The 4 pillars of reparenting. I described pillars to ground the work below, but it is important to note that this process is unique to each individual and does not follow a set path. We are ever-changing, ephemeral beings. Our needs vary and adapt on a daily basis. Our approaches to meeting such requirements must also adapt. The first pillar of reparenting is emotional regulation, or the ability to properly navigate our emotional states. Emotional regulation is our ability to cope with stress in a flexible, tolerant, and adaptive manner. We've been working on this phase throughout the book, especially when we addressed the nervous system's involvement. Deep belly breathing to regulate our stress response. Non-judgmentally watching changes in our body's sensations and recognizing patterns in our ego-based narratives that are tied to those emotional activations are all techniques you are likely well versed in by now. All of the preceding basic work has prepared you for this next step. Many of you may arrive at reparenting and discover you might benefit from interacting more consistently or profoundly with the previous regulatory bodywork. If you recognize yourself in this passage, I offer you permission to put the book down, take a step back, and come back before continuing. The second pillar is loving discipline. This pillar entails establishing and maintaining limits with ourselves throughout time. We accomplish this through making and keeping tiny pledges, as well as building daily routines and habits. Discipline is a vital component of the healing process, and practicing it allows us to show up for ourselves. Many of us were raised with shame-based ideas of discipline. It involved punishment for being bad, and we may have felt criticized or rejected. It's the inverse of self-betrayal. We have chosen to form a new habit, and by demonstrating to ourselves that we are worth showing up for, we are developing a sense of inner dependability and resilience. This instills a profound sense of confidence in us, which pervades all facets of our lives. The act of loving discipline cultivates routine with compassion and flexibility. Your pledge might be modest, like self-healer allies promise to drink a glass of water on a daily basis, or major, like learning how to say no to things that don't benefit you on your journey. I've seen so many more useful ideas from the self-healer community. Floss your teeth every night, wash your face every evening, and solve a crossword puzzle every day. The idea is to do something every day. Do it regularly, and establish trust in yourself that you will show up consistently for yourself. Many parents I've spoken with claim they set their alarm clock for an hour before their children wake up so they can get a head start on the day. They put their phone on airplane mode and do something for themselves before turning their attention to the needs of everyone else. This one thing could be cooking breakfast, going for a stroll, reading a book, working out, or simply relaxing. Nobody can take this hour away from you. One self-healer wrote, "I want to underline that this daily discipline should be done with love." Many people have overly strict restrictions around what they allow themselves. Military-style discipline, which allows little space for flexibility or the inevitable mistake, can result in damaging habits that do not express the actual goals and requirements of our authentic selves. There will be days when we want to stay in bed all day, drink wine, eat pie, or take a break from washing our faces. That's okay. If we've grown in confidence over time, we know we can take a break, and the ritual will always be there for us to return to when we're ready. We will not break apart if we take a day off. The third pillar, self-care, goes hand in hand with loving discipline. In recent memory, the phrase has earned a bad rap for being commodified and used as an example of self-indulgence. True self-care, supporting your needs and respecting your worth, is not at all indulgent, and it's essential to holistic wellness. Self-care is the act of learning to identify and care for your physical and emotional wants and needs, particularly those that were denied to you as a child. There are numerous ways to include acts of self-care into our day. Meditating for 5 minutes or longer, moving our bodies, journaling, spending time in nature, spending time alone, allowing the sun to kiss our skin, and connecting deeply with someone we love. I feel that one of the most important components of self-care is practicing proper sleep hygiene. Getting enough sleep makes us happier, cognitively stronger, and even lives longer. Go to bed a half hour early. Turn off your phone 2 hours before going to bed. Caffeine should be avoided after 1 p.m. Try one, or all of these suggestions, and see how much better you feel in your body and mind. One of the work's ultimate goals, the fourth pillar, is to regain our childish sense of wonder. This condition is characterized by a blend of creativity and imagination, joy and spontaneity, and, of course, playfulness. After studying the dearth of play in the childhoods of young men who went on to conduct murderous actions, psychiatrist Stuart Brown, author of Play, How It Shapes the Brain, opens the imagination, and invigorates the soul, labeled play a public requirement. He has since investigated the importance of play in the lives of thousands of people, and discovered that a life without play relates to the development of depression, chronic stress-related disorders, and even criminal behavior. A lack of play should be addressed like starvation. He stated, "It's a health danger to your body and mind." The reality is that most of us were raised in households where childish wonder was not celebrated or even tolerated. Therefore, creativity was not fostered. How many of us were instructed to put away our paintbrushes because artists don't make money? How many of us have parents who overlooked or suppressed their own artistic aspirations in favor of more practical pursuits? How many of us have been reprimanded for unstructured play when we were supposed to be working? I have no recollection of my mother ever playing with me as a child. Not a single one. That's sad for me, but it's also sad for her. As adults, it is critical that we emphasize the things in our lives that bring us joy in and of themselves, rather than those that bring us money, success, or praise. We can assist re-engage our sense of childhood delight by playing our favorite music and dancing or singing freely. We can act spontaneously, be impetuous, and pursue our desires. We can do something new that we've always wanted to do just because we want to, without having to master it. Learn to sew, study a new language, or take surfing lessons. It may be getting your hands dirty in the garden with your plants, complimenting a stranger on their outfit, or reconnecting with old acquaintances. All of these instances have one thing in common. They are all done for the sake of enjoyment rather than for monetary gain. Dealing with loneliness, disappointment, and anger. Reparenting is arduous, ongoing labor. It's one of the most profound drivers of change. And it takes time and a lot of fine-tuning since our demands vary every day, every second, really. Reparenting is a practice. It is highly personal activity that demands us to constantly identify our changing needs and coping techniques. I must tell you that there may be repercussions. I've received emails from various self-healers who have revealed their challenges with parent figures, family members, and even acquaintances who actively rejected their decision to begin the reparenting process. One of the most stunning emails came from a self-healer's mother, who wrote to chastise me for brainwashing her child into cutting off communication with her as she began the reparenting process. I couldn't blame her for venting her rage outside of the family unit. She had spent a lifetime living in the conditioned behaviors that her daughter was now actively correcting. It was not only normal, but probably felt safer to blame an outsider rather than investigate how intergenerationally transmitted habits influenced her daughter's decision. We will confront not just the judgment of others, but also the judgment of ourselves. Loneliness is a motif that emerges throughout the healing process, but notably during the reparenting process. Reparenting forces us to come into intimate contact with our genuine self, which can be unsettling if we don't already have a deep link with it. It may make you feel more insecure and lonely than when you first started. It may even appear irritating or harmful to engage with yourself so openly. You can't fully engage in reparenting until you've been fully mindful of yourself. Many self-healers realize when reparenting that they've been living with unexpressed wrath, opening our eyes to the ways we were left down, rejected, or traumatized in the past can reawaken underlying sentiments of anger and, in some cases, rage. Some of us may desire to point a finger at or blame our parent figures for our pain. Some of us may wish for our parent figures to swoop in and kiss it all better, like we dreamed they would do as children, at the very least. Many of us want our suffering to be acknowledged. Those of us who are problem solvers frequently want for a specific solution. In fact, many self-healers return to their parent figures and demand to be heard or an apology. Some people may be open to such a discussion. I've met with numerous self-healers who have improved and strengthened their relationships with their parent figures after having hard and honest conversations with them. If you believe that speaking your truth would help you in your reparenting journey, go ahead and do it. A major purpose of this communication would not be to modify the other person's experience, but rather to communicate your own. There is a deep underlying value in articulating how we feel and how we see the past. If you can locate this value and are willing to endure and hold space for whatever reaction arises, you are ready to participate in a dialogue. If you're expecting your parent figures to apologize, validate your sentiments, or affirm your experience, I recommend postponing the conversation until you're more accepting of the unpredictability of the outcome. The priority is your internal recovery. Often, parent figures are not as open to these discussions as many of us would like. This makes obvious sense. Our parent figures have spent their entire lives in a conditioned state. Decades of learned behavior do not simply vanish when you call them out. Undoubtedly, there will be some confusion. These discussions can sometimes be more harmful than beneficial. There may even be resentment directed at you. All of this is to suggest that it is natural to experience anger, and it is simple to let that anger to overtake you. It's vital to allow the anger in. Be in it. And, yes, share it if you want to. And it's especially important to do so without expecting an outsider to confirm your reality or feelings. You are the only person who can accomplish that for yourself. Your reality is legitimate because you have lived it, not because someone or something outside of you has declared so. I believe it is time for me to remind readers who have children to take a deep breath. Parental figures frequently approach the reparenting process with a great deal of worry and remorse. They can't stop thinking about how they will or have already failed their own children. How can we make sure we don't do this to our children? I'm asked nearly every day. Let's get this out of the way right away. You can't. Parenting is both demanding and emotionally draining. It is difficult to be present and attuned to oneself enough to be present, and attuned to someone in order to discover and address their needs. The truth is that you will make mistakes. You're going to come up short. You're going to make a mistake in some way. It's not only acceptable, but it's also advantageous in the long run. Stress helps children develop resilience, which is an important component of emotional development. We will go through this in further detail shortly. Listening to the call of the West, even if the circumstances surrounding my awakening were unpleasant, they provided me with the opportunity to change my entire existence. I began to genuinely realize the various desires that I had been ignoring or suppressing when I eventually detached myself from my family, giving myself the opportunity to exist without being in relation to my family. As a codependent, my needs were constantly defined by others, and I often thought I didn't have any needs. I had to make room for myself in order to enter my distinct being and recognize myself as independent of my family. I met myself in the aftermath of the terror and disaster. For the first time, I realized what I truly required. There have only been 3 times in my life when I have honored my wants, even if it meant that others might be harmed, as a result of my decision. The first time was in college, when I chose to stop playing softball because it no longer fulfilled me. I did it despite knowing that my parents, particularly my mother, would be disappointed and that I might be failing my team. I only did it for myself. The second time was when, after years of alienation, I finally ended my marriage. There was a part of me that wanted to keep going forever, but another part of me said, this isn't working for me. I must make a change. Ollie and I decided to relocate to California for the third time. Moving west was something I wanted to accomplish, but I rejected it as a possibility since I knew it would irritate my family. I was no longer shackled by the invisible cords that connected me to the East Coast, a region I intuitively knew was no longer serving me once I severed my ties with them. If you had told me a decade ago that I would be living hundreds of miles away from Philadelphia and New York City, I would have laughed in your face. I was addicted to the emotional activation provided by the metropolitan environment. The turmoil, loudness, bright lights, and vacant-faced throng were a direct reflection of my inner reality. Former friends saw my transformation as proof of an early midlife crisis. I abandoned my entire existence, a private practice, a family, friends, and the past, and relocated across the nation to begin a new life. When I first began to share my evolving new truth with those closest to me, I was met with raised eyebrows, intrusive questions, and even animosity. When Lolly and I went to California, we felt it was the place for us. As I got more internally balanced, I felt drawn to what naturally instills harmony in my body, nature itself, the warmth of the sun, a location where I can breathe freely and move my body. It was a symbolic extension of the reparenting process. When we eventually chose to act, I was aware of my requirements. I listened to my desires. I allowed myself to fulfill them. I felt the intuitive ping of my inner guidance system, and this time I listened. It was not an easy transition. Transitions are challenging. You are still interrupting your equilibrium, no matter how wonderful the scenario is, and it feels uncomfortable. We are creatures of habit, and when we are unable to engage in our typical patterns, we feel thrown off, vulnerable, and even hostile to change. When we are confronted with an allostatic life event, a job change, a move, a funeral, a birth, or a divorce, it takes us out of our comfort zone and into the wide unknown, which is a naturally unsettling area. When I decided that California was my destiny, it meant closing down the private practice that I had worked so hard to develop, and saying goodbye to many of my clients, to whom I had gotten connected. I had to discover new virtual avenues to maintain certain important ties. It also meant that my choice to cut off all communication with my family was final. I was physically detaching myself from my trauma links, and it felt both liberating and terrible. I now have the tools and habits to deal with the discomfort and uncertainty. I could finally access my intuitive trust in myself, and it felt fantastic. Though I still struggled with loneliness and had many worries about my future, I felt more in sync than ever before. My sleep quality improved, my digestion quickened, and the blockage in my gut loosened. My lungs seemed to open to take in the clean air. I felt lighter in my soul, and my attitude lifted. The more my spirit seemed to speak via my body, the more I knew I desired joy, and I understood I deserved it. I went for a walk one day while working on this book to clear my mind. As I strolled along the beach in my new neighborhood, taking in the sights and sounds of the environment, I began to practice positive messages of support and love. What can I do for myself in this moment? The Mumford & Sons song There Will Be Time came on in my earbuds just as that question entered my mind. I turned up the volume, engulfed by the rhythmic pulse, the swell of the keyboards, and the blending of vocal harmonies. So, please, open my eyes to a new light. There would, indeed, be time. Their statements were foretelling. I stood there, finally seeing with open eyes of consciousness, understanding how to connect to my innermost goals and needs, and genuinely trusting in the unlimited possibilities of the choices we are given in each given moment of time for the first time. I increased the volume. I began bobbling my head and swaying my hips. This was completely unlike of me. I've always disliked dancing. My dislike stemmed from a childhood dancing lesson where I caught a peek of myself in the mirror and observed how much wider my tummy was than the rest of the girls in class. From then on, I felt increasingly uneasy and restricted in my own skin, in my own body. After only a short period, I no longer danced in public, and eventually ended up disdainfully watching others do so, who could be so free. Nonetheless, here I was, over 3 decades later, out in the open in a strange new environment. Swaying to the music, I was soon raising my palms to the sky and jumping around. I was doing some dancing, full throttle. Anyone and everyone can see it. The joyous side of the reparenting process includes letting go of the anxiety of what others think, the conditioned state of judgment, and all the sorrow of our wounded inner child. Dancing on the beach was a radical gesture of self-acceptance for me, a necessary step forward in my healing process. Complete the work. Create a reparenting menu. Spend a few moments considering which of the 4 reparenting pillars you should focus on initially. A good place to start is to ask yourself, what am I most in need of right now? Emotional control. Many of us were not taught the value or practice of emotional awareness as youngsters. It is critical that we establish this habit as adults in order to heal. You can start practicing emotional management by doing the following. Deep belly breathing exercises, observing the sensations that various emotions cause in your body, recognizing what makes you feel emotionally activated, letting emotional responses to pass through you without judgment, allowing any and all feelings to run through you while merely seeing them, using the examples supplied if necessary. Journal or make a list of what you can offer or create for yourself right now in the area of emotional regulation. You may discover new ways to foster this new everyday habit over time. I adore discipline. Many of us were not taught simple, beneficial, and supportive habits and routines as youngsters. As an adult, you can start cultivating this loving discipline by doing the following. Every day, make tiny pledges to yourself, establishing daily habits and routines, saying no to things that aren't beneficial to you, maintaining boundaries even when it is difficult to do so, disconnecting from technology, and devoting time to self-reflection, clearly expressing your requirements in objective, non-judgmental language. Journal or list what you can offer to, or create for yourself right now in this area of loving discipline. Using the examples supplied if necessary, you may discover new ways to foster this new everyday habit over time. Self-care. Many of us were not taught the benefits of things like decent sleep, activity, diet, and connection to nature as youngsters. As an adult, you can cultivate self-care by doing the following. Heading to bed a little sooner, preparing or consuming a home-cooked meal. 5 minutes of meditation or longer. For 5 minutes, move your body or longer. Journaling, spending time in nature and connecting with it, allowing the light to shine on your skin, making contact with someone you care about. Journal or list what you can offer to, or make for yourself right now in this area of self-care. Using the examples supplied, if necessary, you may discover new ways to foster this new everyday habit over time. Childlike wonder is characterized by inventiveness and imagination, as well as delight, spontaneity, and playfulness. Many of us were not taught, as youngsters, the benefits of finding delight and spontaneity, creativity, play, and pure presence. It is critical for grown-ups to remember to play, to connect with and cultivate interests that we enjoy. You can foster this joy by doing the following. Freely dancing or singing, making an unanticipated decision, developing a new hobby or interest, playing your favorite music, gratitude for a stranger, doing something you enjoyed as a child, reconnecting with friends and family. Journal or list what you can offer to, or make for yourself right now in this area of childlike wonder. Using the examples supplied if necessary, you may discover new ways to foster this new everyday habit over time. 12 levels of emotional maturity. Emotional maturity is unrelated to chronological age. Before puberty, some of us reach maturity levels that exceed those of our parent figures, while some come from the womb more mature than our parent figures. I'm only half joking. Emotional immaturity is significantly more common and is characterized by an inability to endure. Those who are emotionally immature have difficulty accepting their own emotions. They respond with rage by slamming a door, or with disappointment by using the silent treatment. People who are emotionally immature are so uncomfortable with their emotions that they generally lash out, become defensive, or entirely shut down anytime they experience one. This could appear as a father yelling, "Stop being dramatic," when a child's emotions clash with his own. After a quarrel, it could be a friend who fully shuts off and goes into silent treatment mode. This behavior is frequently the result of an inability to watch another person's discomfort, as well as an inability to tolerate the existence of diverse emotions. Other people's points of view can be intimidating, and fear of them promotes intolerance. Lindsay Gibson, a psychotherapist, defined emotional immaturity with an emphasis on parenting as the lack of emotional reactivity required to address children's emotional needs. Loneliness is a hazy and solitary experience. You might term it a feeling of emptiness, or being alone in the world for children of emotionally immature parent figures. I identified strongly with this sense of emptiness, having never felt entirely capable of appreciating, let alone enjoying, my experiences for the majority of my life. I sought to find a soul laugh, to embody the pure enjoyment of life. How could I possibly know what made me happy if I didn't know what I truly required? This sense of emptiness, I believe, stems from our ongoing alienation from our true selves, years of conditioned existence, in which we have been unable to genuinely meet our bodily, emotional, and spiritual needs are frequently accompanied with a fear of being misunderstood. Those of us who were reared in families where free expression was discouraged may become too concerned with what others think or feel about us. For many of us, this was a common occurrence, and I believe it is one of the reasons why social anxiety is so widespread now. We see social anxiety and a fixation with appearance play out in the new virtual arena of social media, which many of us use on a daily basis. Our concern with views and likes is partly motivated by our unfulfilled need to be seen and heard. A majority of us expend a great deal of mental energy in order to be understood. Our fear of being misunderstood triggers a physiological response in our bodies, triggering a stress response in which cyclical thought patterns and egoic stories control our actions. This dread ties our sense of self to other people's apparent approval or disapproval. Rejection from our herd might have serious, even fatal consequences for us as social creatures whose evolution was founded on community and acceptance, even if the stakes are smaller today. Our fear of being shunned persists when we are in a state of dread. Our evolutionary need of social approval makes it impossible for us to connect with the people around us. We become reactive and illogical as a result of it. It makes us fearful of doing something ridiculous, such as dancing in public to our favorite song. It is our enhanced understanding of others, not our increased understanding of ourselves, that causes anguish for many self-healers. As we become more mindful of our conditioned way of life, we become more observant of the cyclical patterns that individuals around us exhibit. This is, of course, why so many of us find it difficult to return home. Visiting our family gives us insight into our own habits and patterns, as well as our deeper interior scars, while also igniting many of them. Some of us even experience what is known as survivor's remorse, or the feeling of being the one who got away, as recounted in popular literature. Some of us may be hesitant to share specifics about our growth and accomplishments with individuals we've left behind because of these feelings. Alternatively, we may feel bad about developing out of our old roles and wish for our loved ones to follow in our footsteps so that our ties with them remain intact. Many of us genuinely care about our loved ones and want them to understand that change is required in order to heal. This is an admirable goal, but the fact is that not everyone is on the same road. Healing, as you are now aware, needs daily dedication and must be chosen. It is beneficial to quit fighting the truth of what is freeing up some of our energy to practice embracing all of our sentiments about that reality when our loved ones do not choose the same road as us. Learning to be at ease with misconceptions or being misunderstood is one of the most significant achievements of emotional development. This will enable you to continue to live your life as your most authentic self, regardless of the consequences, when your thoughts, beliefs, and realities are true in and of themselves, not in relation to anyone else. We may not like all aspects of ourselves, but they do exist and must be acknowledged. When our basic sense of self is so fluid and malleable, so susceptible to outside influences, even what we assume others think of us can influence how we see ourselves. In a state of boundarylessness, maturity has no place. We have little emotional resilience because we never learned how to navigate our emotional surroundings, and we are unable to rebound when things don't go our way. When you are true to yourself, you will be judged and criticized. Others will be disappointed by you as well. These are simply facts of life, part of what it is to be a dynamic, unique human. It doesn't imply you're intrinsically right or wrong. As you grow emotionally, you will make more room for people who don't look, sound, act, or think the same way you do. Emotional maturity is defined by the ability to tolerate differences, even stark disparities. The rule of 90 seconds. Emotional maturity permits us to accept all of our feelings, including the ones we'd rather not admit we have. The ability to be aware of and moderate our emotions in order to allow others to express themselves is a basic part of emotional maturity. Or, to put it another way, the ability to withstand all of our emotions without losing control, which is at the heart of all we do. There is a 90-second rule of emotions. Believe it or not, they only last a minute and a half as physiological events. They then come to a close. Our bodies yearn to return to a state of balance. When we are stressed, our cortisol levels rise, and our internal anxiety circuit is triggered. But once the stress is believed to be dealt with, a countering system kicks in to bring our bodies back into equilibrium. Of course, this can only happen if our minds don't get in the way. Only a few of us are capable of allowing our emotions to be solely physiological. Most of us bring them into our mental world and begin spinning stories, brooding, and participating in circular thoughts, which returns us to the emotional addiction feedback loop. A 90-second annoyance can quickly turn into days of frustration, wrath, or even years of grudge-holding and bitterness. Sensations can't properly move through us if we're detached and don't allow ourselves to feel what we're feeling, so they stay trapped as we keep a safe distance away. When you replay upsetting thoughts in your mind, your neurological system reacts as though you're reliving the distressing event. Positive emotions frequently feel like they endure longer and are more strong than distressing feelings. Our sense of time is warped at times of emotional intensity, according to studies, sometimes appearing to speed up and sometimes slowing down to a snail's pace. There is a silver lining to this phenomenon. We can use our conscious mind's power to create a new, more positive reality. I realized the distinction between stress and exhilaration as I began to reconnect more and more with my body and learn the differences among moods. I assumed I was under stress and would shut down or lose control if I felt engaged. As I began to observe myself, I saw that I frequently mistook exhilaration for worry. When I sensed the want to categorize what I'm feeling as worry, I can now take a step back, examine it from a new perspective, and, if necessary, reframe it as something more useful, such as excitement, the butterflies in my stomach that come shortly before I publish an Instagram post on a topic I'm passionate about aren't always stress. They're physical representations of my excitement and enthusiasm. We can cut the mind-body activation circuit and merely remain with our body's sensations by stepping away from automatic responsiveness. We reduce our body's frequently lengthy physiological reactions when we fight the habit of crafting a story about where our feelings came from. We can learn to understand the truth that they will pass if we do so. Observing the changing sensations of our emotions teaches us how to distinguish between them, allowing us to comprehend the various information our body are sending us. We acquire access to our body's knowledge when we are cognizant of and practice objective observing of our body's continually changing sensations, muscle tension, hormone dips, nervous system activations. We can then begin to communicate our more fully realized interior state to others using this information. Management of emotional maturity. We don't simply want to categorize our feelings. We want to get back to homeostasis as soon as feasible. Stress is unavoidable in one's existence. Emotional maturity gives us the freedom to choose how we react to the outside environment. This allows us to climb back up the polyvagal ladder and return to a safe baseline of social involvement, where we feel safe and secure in our relationships with others. So many of us keep repeating the older, conditioned coping skills we learned as children, which don't always serve our true selves. So, how do we identify and address our emotional needs in a mature manner when it comes to dealing with discomfort? Soothing is the favored method. As children, we developed calming techniques that were adapted to our surroundings. Simply put, we dealt with our previous environments and experiences to the best of our abilities given our circumstances. When we update the ways we attend to our emotional needs with new information from our life now, many of us benefit immensely as adults instead of falling back on our childhood coping mechanisms. Proactive soothing methods need making a conscious decision. When we act with agency and proactivity, confronting a situation head-on, we feel at ease, which is frequently quite pleasant. You'll want to find a strategy to neutralize your reactions after you've named and classified your emotions in a non-judgmental manner. Soothing isn't always intuitive, especially if we weren't taught how to deal with adversity in the first place. When I first began my journey toward emotional maturity, I had no idea how to make myself feel better when I was angry or frustrated. Only icing and yelling were used to model me. I attempted a variety of new things after noticing evidence of those now unwanted tendencies in my adult self. Some were effective, while others made me feel even worse when I'm angry or agitated, a feeling I've previously confused with anxiety. Moving my body helps me feel better. Anything that makes me feel stuck feels unhelpful. That implies I go for a walk when I'm feeling stressed. I'm the one who does the dishes to release the physiological energy linked with my feelings. I get my body moving in any manner I can. When I try to relax by reading a book, my favorite hobby, or taking a bath, it really makes me feel more agitated. It's possible that the opposite is true for you, and the only way to find out is to try it out when you're energetically activated. Increase our ability to tolerate distress is a less evident, but possibly equally crucial coping method. We never want to feel reliant on one thing to make us feel better, like an adult version of a pacifier. We want to be able to bob and weave as much as possible in the face of adversity. When we're emotionally charged, we might not be able to go for a stroll or take a bath. Many of us find ourselves in situations where we are forced to suffer our distress. We relied on others to assist us bear or relieve our many discomforts throughout our early years. It's beneficial to learn how to tolerate the normal range and diversity of our emotional experiences as we get older. It's often beneficial to observe the stories that play out in our heads. Take note of what's going on, be present, and refrain from passing judgment. Endurance necessitates an inner trust that is lacking in soothing ways. We must have faith in ourselves to get through this. It instills a sense of self-assurance in ourselves, allowing us to handle the problems that life throws at us without relying on anything outside of ourselves to alleviate our feel-bads. Understand that your inner resources are limited when you begin to acquire emotional tolerance. If you're completely exhausted and try to push yourself despite your limited resources, you'll probably resort to more common coping mechanisms, e.g., lashing out, retreating, or scrolling through social media. Recognize your resource levels to set yourself up for success. Take yourself out of a situation before you are emotionally activated. If you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're stressed and exhausted, stay at home rather than pushing your emotional resources to their limits. Allow yourself to say no when it is in your best interests. Understanding your own emotional boundaries and conveying them to others without fear or shame is a sign of emotional maturity. Coping, which is comforting but also lasting, teaches us to withstand suffering. We used to surround ourselves with distractions because we believed we couldn't deal with difficult situations on some level. You teach yourself that, I can get through this every time you broaden your window of tolerance. We often hear about plunging into the emotional deep end and sinking or swimming, both of which are detrimental to the neurological system. Instead, I encourage you to gradually open that window until it is completely open. And once it is, you will discover a rich reservoir of tolerance for both your internal and exterior worlds. A warning to parents: you can assist children develop emotional maturity in the same way you can grow it in yourself. The finest thing you can do for your child as a parent figure is to commit time and attention to making sure you are taken care of. Your child internalizes it all through co-regulation. When you acknowledge your body, learn to harness the power of your nervous system reaction, access your real self, and demonstrate emotional regulation and flexibility. Maintaining a balanced and self-expressed state will assist your child in dealing with their own moments of dysregulation, allowing them to use you as a safe haven to return to. You can begin to spend some of your own resources to helping your children deal with their emotions once you've began to grow your own emotional maturity. Make sure they're moving their bodies, getting alone time, getting enough sleep, and so on to support self-care and loving discipline in their life. Simultaneously, when stress arises, you can assist them in making sense of it in the same way that you do by identifying bodily sensations. Inquire about their bodily functions. When Samantha makes fun of me, my face becomes hot. When I have to share my toys with Timmy, my heart races. Allow them to attempt alternative strategies to actively relieve those physiological sensations by helping them name the emotion that might connect to those bodily sensations: shame, rage, jealousy. Remember that they will not always be the same as the methods that you find useful. View this as an opportunity to learn more about your children as individuals. Realistically, there will be occasions when a child is stressed by something that occurs outside the home, and you will be unavailable to assist them. Learning to persevere is an important skill for parents to model. You have no idea what your child's future holds. And as much as none of us wants to foresee anything bad occurring to a loved one, we can't always prevent it from happening. Our children will build the internal reserve that will sustain them in their childhood world and well into adulthood if we model stress tolerance or the ability to sit through painful feelings and let them pass. If you haven't figured it out yet, being all right with being flawed is the most important thing you can do as a parent figure. Allowing for imperfection is difficult for many of us, especially those of us who have developed people-pleasing or high-achieving habits as a result of childhood scars. When Lolly or anybody I care about is disappointed in me, I can't bear it. I despise the feeling of being judged when I'm not at my best, or when I'm just unable to assist them as they require at any particular time for whatever reason. Because disappointment is a natural part of life, parent figures can be comfortable that if a space of true love is created and internalized by the child, the traumas experienced as a child will not be debilitating. If parent figures can build the ability to hear and accept their own children's different realities, they will give them permission to question and share their true self's perspectives and experiences to the rest of the world. Children will begin to mirror that honesty and security back to their parents, creating a relationship of real self-expression co-created and co-experienced by parent figure and kid. The basis of the secure attachment type we discussed before is reciprocal authentic expression. You are more free to negotiate the world around you, make errors, and get back up when you fall, when you come from a place of security and safety. This increases our internal resources and aids in the development of resilience as we face the challenges that life inevitably delivers. You may find yourself extending a similar compassion to your own parent figures. As difficult as that may be for some of us and other loved ones as you acquire more grace toward and acceptance of your own shortcomings. Accepting that they are fallible creatures can be irritating, if not downright enraging, as we continue to dig deeper into their conditioning and life situations. We will be able to empathize with them without explaining away their problems. You may empathize with their wounds and sympathize with their pain while keeping the essential limits for your mental, physical, and emotional well-being, not only with others, parent figures, children, friends, but also with yourself. Emotional maturity is about mixing sensitivity and hardness when appropriate. Maturity and meditation, larger than life, is the best way to define John, one of the more emotionally immature self-healers I've met. This is not to denigrate him. He fully agrees with that assessment. He's the type of person who depletes a room's oxygen supply, the one who has to lead a conference call's conversation, the alpha male who erupts if his authority is questioned by someone, especially if that someone is a woman. Everything was always about him. An egocentric worldview comparable to that of a child or toddler, and I can confidently describe him as emotionally stunted. When things didn't go his way, he'd roar or go darkly and ominously silent, depending on how angry he was. He worked in sales, which he despised, but he gained his entire sense of self from exceeding his monthly targets, or, better still, toppling them. He excelled at work, but he suffered with intimacy. He'd never felt at ease enough with anyone, much alone a romantic partner, to let his hair down and just be with them. That was him before he embarked on his rehabilitation path. He discovered a delicate, wounded core of childhood trauma when he peeled back the layers of his response. His narcissism was just a mask for his genuine sadness. He proceeded to tell anecdotes of his father, a man who would blow up when he was drunk, but who might lose his temper at any time. He used to strike John with a belt every now and again. His mother, who had witnessed the events as well, would leave the room and subsequently make explanations for his father's actions. Tellingly, John felt angrier at his mother for not protecting him than at his father for abusing him. People generally seek out those who share their emotional immaturity, and John was no exception. The ladies he was drawn to and attracting appeared to be meek and compliant. They let John scream in rage and rarely intervened or questioned him until the relationship blew up and John felt alone and unnoticed once more. His most recent breakup, which resulted in him angrily shattering a dozen glass plates onto the floor, prompted him to embark on his rehabilitation path. John was mortified when he first heard the term emotional immaturity. He despised realizing how much those words meant to him. It was so startling that he stopped working with the materials for a while. Being conscious can be jarring and unsettling at times. He ultimately began to delve deeper into contemplative practice, increasing his daily meditation exercises from 5 minutes to 10 minutes, and finally, 20 minutes. His limits, an area of his life that he had never known was poorly defined, became a source of great interest to him. He began by compiling lists of the individuals in his life and what his requirements were in his connections with them. And he began by making steps to adjust his own expectations about how others showed up in his interactions. When uncomfortable emotions came, he practiced sitting with them rather than projecting them onto others. Today, John would not dare to label himself mature, which I believe is a sign of his maturation. And he has made great progress. He still struggles with reaction, especially in situations that trigger childhood trauma and make him feel criticized or misunderstood, but he now has the tools to help him manage it. When a difficult emotion, such as rage, arises, he understands it as a physiological response that has no bearing on who he is and is better able to let the feelings pass through his body without acting on them. He continues to work in sales, but he is also a certified meditation instructor, which he describes as his love, his fourth reparenting pillar. He claims that he works on his reactivity every day. It's a part of his daily life. Beams of inner emotional maturity expand outward when we are confronted with difficult situations that put our resources to the test. Our emotional maturity is put to the test. John notes that he is always reviewing his responses, looking for signs of immaturity peeking through the layers of coping and reparenting, preparing to reemerge, which does happen occasionally despite his best efforts. Self-accountability check-ins can help us understand when we are approaching the boundaries of our own resources to cope with stress, or what pushes us over the brink. When life gets stressful, or we suffer stress-induced reactivity, it might be beneficial to revisit the events that influenced our experiences. Some questions that can help us gain control of our reactivity before it takes over are: what can I learn about myself from what happened? What patterns led me here? How can I embrace and grow from discomfort? How can I learn to accept criticism without believing it to be absolute truth? What can I do to forgive myself and others? The more we learn about self-accountability, the more confident we will be in our own abilities. This leaves room for failure. It enables us to be flexible and forgiving when we unavoidably stray from the path. When we have self-confidence, we know that the route is still waiting for us. This is the essence of personal accountability, which leads to empowerment. You will, too, fall off the wagon. There will be weeks when you are completely exhausted and unable to function. There may be occasions when you will be put to the test and will react in ways that will shame you whenever a new source of stress enters your life. Whether it's a sick relative, a new baby, or a breakup, your tools may be thrown out the window. We've all experienced times of emotional immaturity. That's normal. Our access to emotional maturity shifts as we age, responding to our surroundings, our hormonal condition, and whether we're hungry or fatigued. The idea is to equip yourself with the ability to make the greatest option for your emotional state when the world around you alters and changes. Emotional maturity is not a goal to cross off a list. Like progressing to the next level in a video game, you're now a fully realized human. Thus you win. It isn't a mystical state. The underlying message is not one of enlightened beingness. Rather, it is one of hard labor and self-forgiveness that would eventually bring us to greater oneness. Complete the work. Improve emotional maturity and resistance. Step 1. Rediscover and reconnect with your emotions. Emotions are physical occurrences that are accompanied by changes in your body's hormones, neurotransmitters, feelings, and energies. Each of you has a unique way in which your body reacts to certain emotions. To acquire the ability to detect and ultimately alleviate your feelings, you must first get more acquainted with how your body reacts to emotional situations. To accomplish this, I invite you to develop a new daily habit of connecting with your own unique body. Use the meditation script below to assist you with this process. Meditation on body connection. Practicing this meditation throughout the day will assist you in being connected to your body's ever-changing emotional state. To begin, choose a peaceful spot and a comfortable position to sit or lie down for a few minutes. You can use the following guided script to assist you with this process. As you settle into the present moment, start paying attention to yourself and your inner experience. If you're at ease, close your eyes lightly or locate a quiet place to stare. Take a deep inhale, bringing the air all the way down into your lungs. Feel your belly balloon. Spend an additional instant or two letting out a very slow, long breath, and repeat. Feel your lungs fill up, expanding with air. Exhale slowly. Repeat this breathing for as long as you wish, sensing your body sinking deeper into the meditation experience. When you're ready, pay attention to your actual body and all of your current sensations, scanning your body from head to toe. Notice if you feel any tension, tightness, warmth, tingling, or lightness. Spend a few moments on your head, neck, and shoulders before moving downward. Notice any and all sensations in your arms and hands. Lower your body, paying attention to your chest and stomach. Begin at your upper and lower legs and work your way down to your feet and toes. Again, take as much time as you need on this body scan. Spend as much time as you need reconnecting with any region that calls to you, and then return your attention to your breath, gradually expanding it to the environment around you and returning to the sights, sounds, and smells of the present moment. FSJ, check-in of the emotional body. To assist you with this procedure, consider using the following example or creating your own. Today, I'm working on being aware of my body's fluctuating emotional state. I am thankful for the chance to work on being more emotionally mature. Today, I can communicate with my body to better comprehend my feelings. This shift enables me to feel more connected to my emotional environment. Today, I'm practicing by pausing throughout the day to check in with my body's sensations. Step 2. Assist your body in regaining its equilibrium. You can begin to establish techniques to help your body return to its baseline state now that you are more aware of the changes in your body as a result of your emotions. Remember that everyone is different and will react differently to the activities listed below. Take some time to investigate the numerous ways you can soothe your emotions. It may take some trial and error to determine which ones work best for you. We want to create 2 types of coping skills: calming and lasting. Bathing is one of the most relaxing hobbies. A body can be soothed by soaking in warm water. If you have Epsom salts on hand, add them to the bath for extra muscular relaxation. Self-massage is something I enjoy doing. Simply stroking or massaging your feet or lower legs can help. There are YouTube videos on various pressure spots that can assist with stress relief. Reading. Get caught up on that book or article you've been meaning to read for a while. Music is something I like listening to, playing, and writing about. It's entirely up to you. Snuggling. This can be done with anybody or anything, such as your pets, children, friends, lover, or a comfortable bed cushion. Hitting things done if possible. Any kind will suffice. Putting your feelings into words. Scream into a pillow. In the shower. Or outside in a big empty place. Avoid activating the nervous system of a neighbor. Writing. Write about how you're feeling in a letter, a diary entry, or a poem. If you write about the activating event during this period, you will continue to activate your body's physiological reactions. Resting, yes, even if it means canceling plans. That's it, heading your bearings. Make use of your 5 senses to focus on what you can see, smell, touch, taste, and hear in your surroundings. This will assist you in becoming more fully present in the present moment. Breathing exercises are being performed. This can be as simple as placing your palm on your tummy and taking 2 or 3 deep breaths. Observing any changes in your body's energy as your lungs expand and contract. On YouTube or Spotify, you may find a plethora of guided practices. Spending time in the great outdoors. Bring your focus to the whole experience of your surroundings, and pay attention to the various grounding and calming energies that are there. Praying or meditating. This can include any activity or participation in a spiritual or religious-based resonance practice. Affirmations or mantras are said. Quietly repeat the intended statements to yourself. You are safe, you are in command, and you are at ease are some examples. You're trying to keep yourself occupied. Distract yourself from your feelings by focusing on something else. Yes, you read that correctly. You have control over how much attention you pay to your emotions, as long as you aren't constantly distracted from them. Obtaining assistance. Make contact with someone you feel comfortable with. It might be really beneficial to have someone available who will actively listen to your thoughts and feelings. It's helpful to communicate your need for someone to genuinely listen as opposed to delivering advice, as many well-meaning friends do before you begin to share. Also keep in mind that this is not the same as venting or emotional dumping, in which you merely experience the activating event over and over, often becoming trapped in the loop. 13. Interdependence. You will never be done with your emotional maturation. It's a never-ending journey of self-awareness and acceptance. There will be periods of progress and times of setbacks that will put your progress to the test. In reality, I was put to the test as I was writing this chapter. It had been a particularly trying week when I saw a stranger furiously condemning me online. I was tired, overworked, and depleted. I was so discouraged that I felt like I was on the verge of sobbing. I wanted to pack my belongings and go from the life I had created because I despised being misunderstood so badly. Instead, I pondered. I sat on my couch, searching through Instagram, seeking more infractions that would enrage me and tear me apart from the inside, adding to my pain. Ollie said, "Get up, let's go. Let's go to the beach," says the group. It wasn't simply a reason for me to go out of the house and quit moping. It was a remarkable day at Venice Beach, a once-in-a-lifetime chance to witness the waves lit up by the neon created by a nighttime algae bloom's bioluminescence. Despite this, I declined her offer. She left me to stew while she went to the beach. I became increasingly enraged as I wallowed in self-pity. My enraged ego concocted a narrative. How dare she abandon me, as she usually does when things get tough. This is a slap in the face. My mind built a scenario in which she was the betrayer, and I was the betrayed, despite the fact that I had told her to leave. I'd seen enough of myself at this point to recognize that this ego story was a projection of an inner child wound I'd been struggling with for a long time. My underlying belief that I am unimportant. That led to a deeper realization. I'm so pitiful. Ollie can't bear being in my presence. My mind began to revolve around a single idea. I'm alone. I'm on my own. I'm on my own. I could see all of that mental discussion, but I couldn't seem to summon the energy to break out from the loop. Instead, I gave my inner child a few more minutes to pout. Then I raised my head and began to use the skills I had been honing and have shared with you. I started with my breath, focusing on the movement of air into and out of my lungs. I was present at the time, the shock of anger, the gut-sinking sense of disappointment, and the electricity of outrage that came from the hits of social media negativity were all given names. I began to name the emotions that accompanied the sensations: rage, fear, and despair. As I gave them names, stories began to emerge around them, clogging my mind. When my ego started pulling examples out of thin air to prove how worthless I am, I leaned back into my conscious thought, witnessing without judgment and allowing the feelings to come and go. I asked myself, what can I do for myself in this moment? With my conscious mind in command, how am I going to deal with these negative feelings? I moved over to the sink to clean up and do some dishes, and I started telling myself a different story. I am deserving. I'm adored, even if I am physically alone at the moment. I am not alone. My emotional energy discharged outward as I immersed my hands in the warm, soapy water and focused my attentional muscles on the physical act of doing, allowing me to see my emotional state for what it was. I'm tired. I'm working too much, and I let someone else's criticism of my work cause a full-body emotional meltdown. I don't want to be grumpy here. I want to be looking at something lovely with my lover. I determined that I could either stay caught in my feelings by attempting to wash them away, or I could break free from the innate drive toward the familiar and accomplish what I had told myself I would do that day: view those incredible blue waves. I made the decision to escape my self-pitying cocoon. Lolly was staring out at the wonderfully blue water as I arrived at the beach. She was surrounded by scores of others who were taking in Mother Nature's magnificent gift. Without saying anything, I joined Lolly in gazing off into the bright, almost magical water. I was still a heartbroken child who felt misunderstood, but I wasn't alone in my ideas and feelings. If I had let the story consume me, standing on the beach would have been difficult. None of that beauty would have reached me if it hadn't been for you. That beach experience was about a lot more than my own emotional development. It was about my emotional state in relation to others, particularly those I care about the most. We produce joy, creativity, empathy, acceptance, collaboration, and eventually oneness with our broader community as we remodel our mind and brain and reach our genuine self. In all of the awakenings he researched, Dr. Steve Taylor observed similar gains in love and compassion, deep awareness, and inner tranquility. These elements constitute the essence of interdependence, a condition of authenticity and closeness that is the pinnacle of holistic healing's effectiveness. The effort thus far has brought us to this point, to the ability to embody oneness, returning us to a condition of pure consciousness and connectedness with all that is. We are literally reshaping our minds and bodies in order to return to our most pure soul expression. We discover the divine within ourselves, which extends to the rest of the world. How to find the self-healer community. I haven't yet discussed a critical component of my healing journey: discovering my community. This is the interdependent self's goal. I discovered mine during that lonely phase of self-discovery, when I believed there were few people who could relate to my newfound consciousness. I felt so alone, like if Lolly and I were the only ones awake in a sleeping world. As I learned how to repair it, I established boundaries and severed relationships that were no longer helping me, which included severing ties with those people I formerly regarded to be part of my core community. I began to make decisions that went against the grain of society. No more happy hour drinks. No more overburdening myself by making arrangements. No more late evenings that disrupted my sleep and daily routine. I'd come a long way, and I was overjoyed. My inner voice prompted me to connect with people and the larger universe. It felt unsatisfying to be cut off from everyone. I had to discover my tribe, share my knowledge, and learn from others. That's when Lolly suggested I start blogging about my experience. I was still in Philadelphia at the time, working as a therapist trained in the mainstream approach, and I needed to keep my day job. My opinions, I felt, would not only alienate me from many of my colleagues, but would also drive away some of my more traditional clients, and I still needed to make ends meet. My self-expression, however, lacked genuineness. My desire for connection was the driving force behind my decision to share my experience on Instagram. As I sought out individuals who could comprehend the language of self-healing and relate to this new world of holistic well-being. In 2018, I launched The Holistic Psychologist, and the response was virtually immediate. So many other people were looking for connection and had quite similar experiences and knowings. Armies of individuals were ready and willing to take on this difficult task. As word spread, a new goal emerged: to create a safe and secure community that would provide the largest possible space for healing. The figures continued to rise. Each person that joined the ranks of self-healers reaffirmed my faith in the message, giving me the confidence to devote myself entirely to proving the ideals of holistic psychology. As I embraced the teacher role, sharing information as I incorporated it into my own life, the community grew and continued to provide. It was the deliberate co-creation of a new society of spirits on a similar path back to their original self. People from all across the world shared their resources and methods. The more I talked about it, the more people joined in and shared their own healing stories. The more I adapted and changed, the more the community reflected that growth, which was similar to co-regulation on a vast scale. This interpersonal social media engagement has been the most profoundly fulfilling contact I've ever experienced. I've found my people, and with them, the power of my voice, my mission, my higher purpose, and my interconnected self. The impact of community. According to studies, 3 out of every 5 Americans feel lonely. I would argue that this figure is artificially low because people are embarrassed to confess they are lonely. Admitting that we feel alone exposes us and appears to show some fundamental flaw. I am unwanted because I am unlovable. This speaks to me deeply, as I'm sure it does to many others. We were all raised in indigenous communities, no matter where they came from. Our forefathers lived in groups for safety, division of labor, stress reduction, and support in many facets of life. Whether we perceive ourselves to be individualistic or collectivistic, we all require the help of others in order to flourish. Our body and minds were designed to communicate with one another. Connection is fundamental in the human experience. We cannot thrive without it. As a result, experts have discovered that today's loneliness epidemic is a critical public health issue. Loneliness, like trauma, increases the prevalence of autoimmune diseases and chronic illnesses. In his book Together, The Healing Power of Human Connection in a Sometimes Lonely World, Dr. Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General of the United States under Presidents Obama and Biden, wrote that loneliness is associated with an increased risk of heart disease, dementia, depression, anxiety, sleep disturbances, and even premature death. Clearly, a lack of connection does more than just harm our psychological well-being. Ambivalent relationships, Those in which our link is emotionally conflicted have been found to have the same negative impact on our mental and physical health as being alone. According to journalist Lydia Denworth's book Friendship, The Evolution, Biology, and Extraordinary Power of Life's Fundamental Bond, more than half of all married couples have mixed feelings about their partners. These ambivalent connections, in my opinion, are frequently trauma attachments that are not built on sincerity. How could they be? How can you spend your life with someone you don't really like if you are aware of your wants and needs? Because we are disconnected from our intuition. So many of our relationships, even our closest ones, do not serve our genuine selves. Fortunately, those of us who have supportive relationships, friendships, and communities experience the opposite effects on our well-being. We are happier, healthier, and live longer. This is not something that can be left to chance. Even if your community is not just outside your front door, you can make determined attempts to locate it. According to research, internet connections can be just as important as real-life ones. Get out there and meet your tribe. They're there. Believe me, genuine friendship. The act of being separate together is interdependence. A two-way situation of true connection. Only when I am one with myself will I be able to connect truly with people in ways that meet both of our spiritual, emotional, and bodily needs. Of course, not all connections help us in the same ways, and not all partnerships are equally mutual. We can enter a safe zone once we've expressed our requirements and freely established our boundaries. When we have faith in our inner world, knowing that we have the means to face the various hardships that life throws to us, we can project that faith and security into our society. The way we treat ourselves influences how we treat others, and vice versa. Everything is linked. To have true relationships, you must first concentrate on becoming one with your own authenticity. Only then will you be able to detect and respond to that ping from your intuition. This is someone with whom you should make contact. I'm sure you've experienced it. Sometimes all it takes is a glimpse to realize this person is intended to be in my life. It's a flutter in your soul alerting you that you were destined to meet this person. That happened to me after years of effort on reconnecting with myself. I was a few years into the process. At the time, I felt much more in sync, and when I began to distribute my healing messages, I was confident enough in my own inner resources to know that, while my message might not resonate with everyone, it would reach the individuals it was meant to reach. That's when I met Jenna, a newcomer to the Self-Healers community. I felt our connection even via the internet, and always related to her comments. Through the digital interface, that ping of intuition was crying out. A line gathered around me after the first free public inner child meditation at Venice Beach. The first event I wrote about in the book's foreword. As the holistic psychologist, I smiled and said hello to everyone, feeling overwhelmed by the outpouring of thanks. A few hours later, as the end of the line approached, I noticed one woman who had waited all the way to the end and was smiling at me while holding her hands over her heart. At ping, 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 ping. I felt a wave of familiarity even before she said anything, as if I had always known her, as if our souls were already in intimate communication. And Jenna, she introduced herself. I couldn't believe my eyes. Out of a crowd of thousands, my intuition led me to her. We talked, both ecstatic to finally meet in person. She almost inadvertently handed me her oracle cards. A deck of lovely pictures, the present's generosity. Really, the gift of an intimate part of herself, meant so lot to me. I carried it with me through every major life change that followed. It was one of the few things I brought with me when I moved from Philadelphia to California. Year later, Lolly and I founded the Self-Healers Circle a few months after the meditation to provide access to the framework and everyday tools for self-guided healing. The first day of the launch was a whirlwind. 6,000 people joined up in an hour, and our system failed. I was having a nervous breakdown 2 days in, recognizing I was in much over my head. The need was simply too tremendous. We weren't prepared to tackle anything on our own. Jenna messaged me just as I was about to bury my head in the sand and call it quits, claiming she was feeling a tremendous inner need to reach out. I'm dedicated to this cause. We believe a new world is conceivable, and we are actively working to create it. My soul is calling me to do this. I'm here to support you in the movement's future. Let's talk about it. It was as if the universe was winking at us, nodding, and saying, yes, I will continue to put the proper people in your path when you are receptive to them. A day later, Jenna became the first member of our team. She has since become an essential component of the holistic wellness movement. Without a question, we both needed to have connected into our intuition voices for this accidental connection to occur. When you are aligned, you will attract people who are also aligned. The collaborative we enter the world, as we now know, in a state of sheer sponginess. We amass our egoic separateness of being as we learn how to live and navigate the unknown, and we learn how to identify ourselves in relation to others. This is who we are, not what we are. These are the things we enjoy, not those. This division manifests itself as a narrative that defines us versus them. The outside versus the inside. This comparative narrative, with us safely on the inside and them on the outside, is an especially ingrained aspect of our basic identities for those of us who grew up in codependent homes like myself. As we heal, we reclaim our connection to the real self that defined us as children. Many of us can't even consider returning to that vulnerable state because our ego is so sensitive, so intent on keeping us safe and comfortable, that our identity is entwined with the opposition of the other. We often do not feel safe enough to access the collective we or the connectivity of all humans when we are in this state. Peeling back the layers of our psyche, learning about our conditioning, separating from our beliefs, and experiencing our physiological states allows us to realize our similarities not only with those we love, but also with our communities and the rest of the world. We begin to evolve into an altruistic, reciprocal society when we all begin to tap into that collective attitude. Although altruism appears to be the polar opposite of the survival of the fittest evolutionary drive, it has proved critical to the human species' survival. Allowing each individual's distinctive expression allowed the demands of the larger community to be satisfied in tribal days. Each puzzle piece served a purpose. The needs of one become the needs of all when we are a part of the collective we. Only when our nerve systems are open and sensitive to connection can we participate in this expression of collective togetherness. This indicates that in order to connect with and care for others, we must be in a peaceful, balanced state. Our perceived stress levels drop. Our vagus nerve moves us into our ideal resting state, and we're in a prime condition of joyous expression, spontaneity, healing, and connection when we're in the happy place of our social engagement mode, and in a secure, comfortable setting. Our bodies must feel completely protected in order to reach true union. Our physiology conveys this level of safety to others through the process of co-regulation. As we studied in previous chapters, our inner states are frequently replicated by people around us, making our inner worlds contagious. When we feel safe, others do as well. The problem is that this is also true in reverse. This is the main reason why many of us have been unable to connect. We can't feel safe enough to interact with people because the vast majority of us have a nervous system that isn't functioning properly. As a result, we feel more lonely, sicker, and less capable of dealing with life's challenges. This vicious cycle continues over time, leading to a rapid decline into disconnection and other disorders. It's a catch of the worst kind. We're stuck in fight, flight, or freeze mode which makes true bonding physiologically impossible. This state is reflected back to us by others around us, who can't help but internalize it, leading to our global loneliness and disconnection epidemic. This failure to connect with others affects not only our personal family and friends, but also the larger community. In our struggle, none of us are alone. You're not just a cog in the machine. For better or worse, your internal mood influences people around you. When we feel safe and secure, we feel free to express our internal states, even if they are dysregulated or negative, knowing that with the aid of our group, we can return to baseline. Those who never argue or fight are trapped in a dysregulated system that artificially reduces their stress levels. In order to achieve closeness, you must be willing to communicate your true self, as hazy as it may be, without fear of being misunderstood or facing condemnation or retribution. We can voice our differences without fear in a safe zone of mutual respect and still return to balance. The knowledge that we may return to our fundamental resting state offers us the ability to withstand suffering. These cycles of dysregulation leading to co-regulation help us all acquire a core belief and faith in our internal resources. It's vital to remember that for many BIPOC, returning to safety and balance is very impossible, because safety and balance were never present in the first place. These individuals remain locked in a system that has been unbalanced from its inception and is now long overdue for the required changes to establish safe and secure communities for all of us. We everyone deserve the chance to develop the suppleness to digest life's changing stresses and return to a secure environment. Everyone gains when we cultivate supportive friendships while deliberately connecting with our inner world. It's what reciprocity is all about. That essence is what links all of us together. There is no such thing as we or them. We can become sensitive to interacting with things that are beyond our human comprehension by tearing down these boundaries between us as individuals. This could include communicating with your chosen god or ancestors, witnessing the birth of your kid, spending time in nature, or becoming lost in a type of art that particularly inspires you. It's a large-scale sensation of oneness that can be savored in even the tiniest moments, producing an incomprehensible and breathtaking sense of awe. This sensation is thought to be the result of an evolutionary response to uncertainty. According to researchers, it pushed our forefathers to form bonds with others as they struggled to make sense of life's myriad mysteries. When we saw an eclipse, for example, our collective astonishment brought us closer together in our enjoyment of life's beauty and terror, making us feel safer. The only way to experience wonder is to open our minds to the people and the larger environment around us. The truth of our existence can be found in the individual soul that exists within each of us. The first piece, which is most important, says Chief Black Elk of the Oglala Sioux Nation, is that which comes from the souls of people when they realize their relationship, their oneness with the universe and all its powers, and when they realize that the Great Spirit dwells at the center of the universe, and that this center is really everywhere. It is within each of us. I mentioned at the outset of this book that transcendent experiences rarely occur in the archetypal holy context, on a hilltop or next to a babbling brook. Spiritual growth can be a difficult process. Transcendence, in all of its manifestations, becomes available to you once you've completed the job of mending your body, mind, and soul, and regained your ability to connect with the broader cosmos. Awakenings will come once you peel back the ego's window dressings and connect to the purest, most authentic part of yourself. Once you reach out to your community in an open state of open receptivity, true insight and healing can only happen in these moments. You repair the world around you as you cure yourself. Get to work. Evaluate your separate relationships. Developing independent connections takes time for many of you, especially if you're like me and came from a codependent conditioning background. You can begin by following the steps below. Step 1. Determine your present level of interdependence, or lack thereof. Take some time to analyze yourself in the following areas to develop awareness of your current level of interdependence. Are you confident in your ability to set and maintain clear boundaries in all of your relationships, or will you have to spend some time identifying and establishing new ones? Can you create a safe environment for open dialogue and emotional processing for yourself and others? Or do you need to spend some time analyzing your own emotions and learning when to take a pause before communicating? Do you feel free to express your truth and reality, even if it differs from that of others? Or are you still afraid, ashamed, or guilty about how you think others will react when you behave? Are you clear about your intentions? Are you aware of the factors that influence your decisions? Are you able to pinpoint what you're looking for in your life's experiences and relationships? Or do you require additional time to hone your self-witnessing skills? Is it possible for you to observe your ego and shadow without acting on every thought? Or do you think you'll benefit from further practice examining these parts of your daily life? Step 2. Foster a sense of interdependence. Begin to make new choices that will support your aim of reaching interdependence, using the list from Step 1 to decide the areas you wish to strengthen. Practice setting a daily intention to generate change in one area at a time, using the examples below. FSJ, establishing independence. In my connections today, I'm practicing generating interdependence. I'm thankful for the chance to build more fulfilling relationships. I can now express myself honestly while yet feeling connected to people. In all interactions, change in this area allows me to feel more connected to my genuine self and needs. Today, I'm practicing telling my spouse the truth about how I felt about our recent fight. Thank you so much for having the guts, openness, and faith to accompany me on this trip. Keep in mind that this trip is ongoing, and it will change and evolve as you do. My goal is for you to become a living embodiment of the reality that recovery is possible. Your life will be a powerful, living monument to that possibility when you begin to perform the job. I'll leave you with a day in the life of doing the work, which is, of course, a loose guide to my practice. I want you to make your work practice one of a kind. Take what speaks to you and leave the rest. You are the finest healer you can be. A day in the life of a worker. Help your body balance. Investigate your body's physical requirements by answering the following questions. Which meals make your body feel good, and which make it feel bad? How much sleep and when does your body need to feel restored? How much and when activity helps your body release stored emotions? Balance your neurological system by doing polyvagal work on a daily basis, such as breath work, meditation, or yoga. Manage your mind. Include more aware and self-witnessing moments in your regular routine. Identify your ego stories and shadow self, paying attention to how your self-narrative influences numerous emotional reactions and coping strategies. Develop a daily relationship with your inner child and begin to reparent yourself by fostering your wise inner parent to assist you in identifying and meeting your unique bodily, emotional, and spiritual needs. Reestablish connection with your soul. Investigate and reconnect with your deepest desires and passions. Experiment with expressing your true self in all aspects of your life. Epilogue, the pizza delivery service. There was so much I couldn't recall when I started thinking about creating this book and assembling all the key moments in my professional and personal life that I wanted to share with you. My brain was still struggling with the after effects of early childhood trauma, and my body was constantly battling nervous system responses that kept me detached and unable to access the past. The one that bothered me the most was my inability to recollect the exact phrasing of the quote that I encountered during my walk past the Rubin Museum of Art in New York City, the one that opened my mind to the concept of consciousness and sent me into a whole new way of being. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how many terms I looked up or how many exhibition catalogs I looked through in pursuit of that quote, I couldn't find it. Meanwhile, I was settling into a new life in California. As I began to establish a routine, I noticed myself relapsing to old patterns in response to feeling out of my element. I began to lament my previous existence, even though I knew life was not serving my best self. The old Nicole found it comforting and comfortable. At the same time, the holistic psychology message was spreading like wildfire around the world, with over 2 million people following my posts on social media and participating with the work on levels that my mind could not comprehend. I felt elated, really vindicated, but also overwhelmed. My inner kid, anxious to be seen and loved, began to tremble beneath the weight of so many eyes. I was afraid of being misunderstood, and when I was, I felt like a failure. That a global pandemic struck, bringing everything into sharp focus. There was a great deal of anguish, suffering, and trauma. We were all in it together, locked up, straining energetically and physically in a strange new reality. The stress was unbearable. For the first time in years, I, like many others, felt deeply uncommitted to my journey. That lack of commitment showed itself in subtle ways, such as when I stopped cooking for myself, which was a regular act of self-care that I treasured. I normally enjoy feeding myself and people I care about. I just couldn't muster the energy to make myself a meal during lockdown. Lolly, Jenna, and I were reading through Postmates one evening when we decided to order pizza. We discovered a store that sold gluten-free crust. I had never ordered from that place and had never heard of it, so our decision was purely based on the web evaluations. When I elevated the pizza box to eye level, I spotted some adorable calligraphy on the side of the box. Then I read the words and almost tripped over the box. We don't remember days. We remember moments. Cesar Pavis. It was brought right to my front door. It was the quote I'd been looking for, the one that sent me down the rabbit hole of self-discovery. That one came back to me like an echo, a reminder of how much I had grown. Among the millions, billions of quotable sentences out there in the universe, my memory flashed back to crying into my porridge, the apartment pool where I collapsed for the first time, and wheeling my toy car beneath the kitchen table of my childhood home. It was all there, all parts of who I am today, who I was then, and who I will become one day. As I breathed in and out, I let the words sink in. Gratitude permeated every fiber of my body. I can't say that the pizza box immediately led me to the next stage of my personal and spiritual development, but it did help to affirm my self-confidence and awareness. I was once ill, injured, and unconscious. Despite the current setbacks, I was living this quote. That pizza box, I believe, gave me the confidence to make another intentional decision. I decided it was time to reconnect with my family. I needed to set that hard boundary to cut off contact with them in order to discover who I was without my family's overbearing presence. I was able to see myself for the first time. I saw my strengths. I saw my vulnerabilities. I met my inner child, and I accepted my scars because I didn't trust myself. I imposed no communication. I was aware that I was on a dangerous slope back into codependence. Those strict boundaries helped me connect to my genuine self, which allowed me to finally connect more honestly with others, and, eventually, with all of you. It was the ideal state for attempting to reconnect. It appeared to be a now or never situation. It all began with a letter. I kept it brief and sweet, essentially indicating that I am ready to reconnect if you are, too, ready and eager to collaborate to build a new connection. It was an acknowledgement that I was willing to engage in conversation. My family reacted. They were reluctant, but eager to participate, indicating that they, too, saw the space as an opportunity to begin their own recovery. I'm not sure how this new relationship will turn out. I'm giving myself the freedom to choose. I'm giving myself the gift of openness and curiosity in order to investigate the possibilities of the connection that arises from my own inner self-trust and self-love. And I'm excited to see what it may or may not bring. Every moment, we have a choice. We can dwell in the past, or we can look forward and imagine a different future. We have a tendency to revert to old patterns when we return to a system, regardless of how much effort we accomplish on our own. The temptation is to fall back on old habits and subconscious training. We can also choose to take part in the opening of an unknown, uncertain door. I know now that if that road is not serving me well, I will be aware of it and will be able to turn around, close the door, and choose a new one to open. We have all changed in our own ways as of this writing. My sister has begun her own self-healing journey, and I have moved away from family therapy and into mending our ties in everyday life. When my father was away the other day, I contacted my mother to assist alleviate the loneliness I knew she was experiencing. I didn't feel obligated to make her feel better. I did it because I wanted to, and it felt great. I'm still walking a fine line between wanting to assist my family and doing so in a way that works for me. I'm still taking it one step at a time, consulting my intuition for guidance in every interaction. I'm now confident that I'll make the best decision for myself in the end. This is what this effort is all about. Having the ability to choose. We have the ability to choose how we treat our bodies, how we present ourselves in relationships, how we build our realities, and how we picture our futures. Whatever road you choose, as long as you choose it consciously and trust yourself in the process, you will be prepared. There are no road maps, no directions, no gurus, and no sages to guide you. There are no magic drugs or checklists that will make you better. My energy and thoughts influence the world around me, and I am a powerful creator of my universe. Yes, there are circumstances beyond my control, but we do have control over how we perceive the world. We have the ability to change the way we care for ourselves. We have the ability to alter how we understand our surroundings and interact with those we care about. We have the ability to modify the way we connect to ourselves, and as a result, the way we connect to the universe. There is always an opportunity to grow, expand, and inspire, and this spreads to the community. The goal of this book is to reconnect us with our true essence, our pure awareness, the embodiment of who we were before conditioning took hold. We wish to reconnect with the collective we in order to tap into the deep pool of self-empowerment that exists inside all of us. Nobody can look into the future. We have intuition, self-trust, and emotions, all of which provide knowledge that can help us make the best decisions possible. This is what healing is all about. Establishing choice and trust in the tools we use to genuinely live our ephemeral existence, regardless of what happens. Acknowledgements. It's been a pleasure to share our work and see our network of hashtag self-healers grow into a massive movement. Each of you is a living testament, and your numerous words of healing from all around the world allowed this book to be born. I will be eternally grateful for your encouragement and conviction in these teachings. You gave me the confidence to keep going because you allowed me to believe in myself. Every individual who heals inspires another to do the same. You are all changing the course of our common destiny. To Ally, who has walked beside me while I have stood in truth. Your narrative exemplifies the limitless potential that exists inside every one of us. It is a true honor to accompany you on this journey of empowerment. Thank you to my parents, whom I feel I selected. Your tale, your love, and your own unresolved pain inspired me to address my own. I teach this work for you in every generation before you who did not have access to this information and hence lived in shame. You taught me how to accept responsibility and rediscover my true self. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to reflect. To my mentors, who are primarily from afar, I am grateful beyond words for challenging the status quo and pioneering the trail. I've realized that it may be a difficult and lonely trip at times, and your wisdom unlocked doors within me that I had never discovered through regular learning. Your bravery inspired mine. I expressed my truths so that others can be motivated in the same way you were. Thank you to Dado Derviskanik, my agent, for being such a caring and smart advisor during the process of creating this book. I got chills all over my body when you first said the title and gave birth to it. You work because you want to make the world a better place, and it's a pleasure to be able to collaborate with you. Without the help of the Harper Wave team, I would not have been able to write my first book. You saw my vision and felt that the rest of the world should as well. Thank you to Karen, Julie, Yelena, Brian, and the rest of the Harper team for their contributions to the creation of this project. Thank you to all of our international publishers, notably Pippa Wright and her team at Orion Publishing Group, for believing that this book should be translated into their local languages to help spread the worldwide message of self-healing. I'm extremely fortunate to work with a group of conscious, lovely people. Each of you embodies this work and helps to co-create the collective space for it to exist. Jenna Weekland, whose soul has traveled through countless lifetimes to join mine in service to the greater good. Thank you for following your heart and turning up bravely to take your rightful role in this movement. Your heart is pure love, and it serves as a daily source of motivation for my continuing growth. Words can't explain how grateful I am. Thank you for seeing me, Lolly, my life and business partner. Thank you for pushing me forward in my development. Thank you for believing in me before I even realized what I was capable of. You've taught me a new type of love, one that provides a true and honest space in which I can finally acknowledge all that makes me who I am. You continued to stand in truth beside me every day, holding our vision with blind confidence. I promise to bring this vision to life, always, because you're ready. Each of you is holding this book. You've found your way back to who you truly are. I continue to trust in your boundless potential and will accompany you on this path. This book is for everyone who has been called to be free. The bravest journey a soul can take is to shed our protective layers in service of community healing. I see every one of you and respect you. Holistic Psychology Terminology Glossary. ALLOSTASIS. The physiological process of returning to equilibrium after a stress reaction state. Fight or flight. Analytic mind. The prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for problem solving and decision-making, is the thinking area of the brain. Attachment, a human relationship or tie shaped by early childhood relationships with parental figures. Authentic love, a safe space for people's mutual progress in which each person can be seen, heard, and truly expressed. The component of the central nervous system that regulates involuntary functions, including heartbeat, respiration, and digestion, is known as the autonomic nervous system. Autopilot, the state of living instinctively and without consciousness, in accordance with pre-programmed patterns. Habit, behavior modeling, demonstrating behavior to others by one's behaviors. Decisions, and interpersonal interactions. Belief, a habitual thought based on personal experience. A belief is formed over years of thought patterns that form neural pathways, and it requires both internal and external validation to be successful. Boundary, a protective boundary formed between oneself and others in order to define where one finishes and the other begins. Individuals may honor their own needs and foster honest relationships when they have clear boundaries. Conditioning, the coping techniques, habits, and core beliefs we learned as children from our parents, authority figures, and the larger culture. Consciousness, the current state of awareness in which a decision can be made. Adaptive and maladaptive coping strategies. Actions we perform in an attempt to reclaim feelings of safety. Core beliefs. Before the age of 7, we have buried in our subconscious our innermost perceptions about who we are based on our life experiences. Co-regulation. When a child or infant is in a stressful situation, and the mother uses a soothing tone of voice, or holds the child while simultaneously acknowledging the child's distress. This interaction or exchange allows for safety and security in processing difficult and stressful emotional experiences. Cortisol, a stress hormone that triggers the body's fight or flight response, causing it to engage with or flee a perceived threat. Inner critical parent, the internalized voice of a parent figure that denied one's reality as a child, or humiliated or invalidated our needs, emotions, and thoughts. Dissociation, a stress response in which a person is physically present but mentally detached, numb, or shut down as a result of a nervous system overload. Tolerance to difficult emotions. Endurance, the ability to feel and be with a difficult feeling before returning to a regulated state. Dysregulation, a state of nervous system physiological imbalance. Egocentric state, a developmental stage of childhood characterized by an inability to comprehend a viewpoint or opinion that differs from one's own. Things appear to happen to us, because of us, in egocentric situations, resulting in the erroneous notion that another's actions reveal something about who we are as individuals. Consciousness of the ego, complete identification with the ego, which often leads to reactivity, defensiveness, and shame. Emotional addiction, the subconscious mind's unconscious need to return to familiar emotional states, in which the nervous system and neurotransmitters activate stress hormone reactions. Emotional dumping, when you dump your emotional problems on someone else without considering or empathizing with their situation because of personal, internal pain. Emotional immaturity is defined as the incapacity to maintain room for others' thoughts, opinions, feelings, or viewpoints. Emotional maturity, the ability to control one's emotions, allowing for flexible thinking, open communication, and stress resilience. Emotional regulation, the ability to respond to stress in a flexible, tolerant, and adaptive manner that allows our nervous system to return to normal. Emotional resilience, the ability to be adaptable and quickly recover from a range of emotional states. Empowerment consciousness, the ability to recognize and accept the ego in order to establish a place of awareness. This space allows a person to make decisions that aren't based on knee-jerk ego reactivity. Enmeshment, a relationship dynamic in which a lack of personal freedom and autonomy is caused by a lack of boundaries and shared emotions. Enteric nervous system, ENS, the component of the autonomic nervous system that controls all gut functions. Fight or flight is a nervous system response designed to keep us safe from an impending harm. Future self-journaling, a journaling technique for consciously creating new neural pathways and emotional states, which leads to long-term behavioral change. Holding space, being totally present and curious with someone while they disclose their emotions and experiences without criticizing or attempting to change them. Holistic psychology, a practical healing philosophy that analyzes and addresses all aspects of the person, mind, body, and soul, encourages rather than suppresses the discovery of reasons of symptoms, and recognizes the universe's interconnectivity. Homeostatic impulse, the habit self is a psychological and biological drive toward the familiar. Homeostasis, the ability to keep one's internal and neural systems in a somewhat balanced state independent of what is going on in the outside world. Inner child, an unspoken portion of the mind that houses our unmet needs, suppressed childhood emotions, creativity, intuition, and the ability to play, inner child wounds, the painful memories of not having our physical, emotional, or spiritual needs to be seen, heard, and truly expressed satisfied as children that we carry into adulthood. Interdependence. Within a partnership, a reciprocal supporting closeness that allows for limits, safety, autonomy, and full self-expression, intuition, and inner knowledge and insight that, when paid attention to, leads us down our true path, the most authentical, spiritually connected self, the self that lives outside of conditioned patterns and conditioned responses. The steady stream of mental chatter that flows through the human mind is referred to as the monkey mind. The brain's evolutionarily built bias of prioritizing, and so valuing negative information above good information is known as the negativity bias. NEUROPLASTICITY. The brain's ability to establish new connections and pathways, as well as change and adjust the way its circuits are connected in response to our experiences. The nocebo effect is a scientifically verified phenomena in which unfavorable expectations about a medical treatment or prognosis result in negative outcomes. Normative stress. Predictable and expected stressful events that happen to everyone at some point in their lives, such as birth, marriage, and death. The parasympathetic nervous system, also known as the rest and digest system, is a division of the autonomic nervous system that is in charge of saving energy, reducing heart rate, and relaxing the muscles of the gastrointestinal tract. The placebo effect, a scientifically verified phenomena in which an inert substance, such as a sugar pill, alleviates sickness symptoms. The polyvagal theory, a theory proposed by psychiatrist Stephen Porges that suggests the vagus nerve plays a key role in central nervous system control, influencing social connection, fear reactions, and overall mental and emotional well-being. Prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that controls complex activities like problem-solving, decision-making, long-term planning, and metacognition, our ability to witness and think about our own thoughts. PSYCHONEUROIMMUNOLOGY, a discipline of science devoted to the study of the mind's neurological systems and immune systems' intricate interactions. REPARENTING, the daily, focused practice of relearning how to address the physical, emotional, and spiritual needs of the inner child. Reticular activating system, RAS, a bundle of nerves in the brain stem that filters the onslaught of stimuli in the environment and is important for maintaining behavior, arousal, consciousness, and motivation. Self-betrayal, a learned coping technique that begins in childhood and involves denying portions of ourselves in order to be seen, heard, and accepted by others. Shadow self, the undesirable aspects of our personality that are repressed or ignored as a result of guilt and indoctrination. Social engagement mode, a nervous system state of regulation that allows one to obtain safety and security in order to be open and receptive to social interactions. Soothing, the act of calming our emotions and allowing us to return to a state of homeostasis. Spiritual trauma, consistent feelings of not being seen, heard, or free to express oneself authentically, resulting in a detachment from one's true self and generating misery, loneliness, and internalized shame. Subconscious, the part of the mind that contains all of our memories, suppressed feelings, childhood wounds, and core beliefs. Survival brain, a nervous system condition in which the brain is hyper-focused on perceived threats, resulting in black and white thinking, terror, and emotional blindness. The fight or flight reaction to perceived stress is governed by the sympathetic nervous system, which is a part of the autonomic nervous system. Trauma, any experience in which an individual is unable to emotionally regulate, analyze, and finally release the incident, resulting in nervous system dysregulation because of their individual upbringing and modeled coping methods. Trauma affects each person differently and cannot be certified or measured. Trauma bonding, a learned habit of attaching to people in a way that echoes or reenacts our early relationships to parental figures. Trauma connections can occur in both romantic and platonic relationships and are characterized by emotional abandonment, a lack of boundaries, entanglement, or avoidance. Our nervous system's ability to switch between sympathetic and parasympathetic activity in response to daily stress is known as vagal tone. Poor vagal tone causes erroneous responses and heightened sensitivity to perceived threats in our surroundings. This overactivates the body's reflexes, resulting in a general lack of emotional and attentional balance. Wise inner parent, a caring practice of developing an internal narrative that experiences oneself without judgment as part of reparenting with loving awareness. The wise inner parent can see, hear, acknowledge, and honor all emotional states, behaviors, and emotions